Good morning to some of you, good afternoon to most of you, and to our friends across the pond, good evening, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. If you are new to the channel, if you are new to the show, please hit like, please hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell as we are constantly doing cross streams with other channels. Also, if you have the means and you feel so inclined, you'd like to help support the channel grow even further, become a patron. We have access to our champagne room, where usually when we do our weekday shows, we go into a patron-only champagne room where we hang out like we did last Thursday for an extra 3.5 hours. And we have our movie nights, which we are adding an additional movie night to. Also, patrons get access to the Mau Mau Hour with Pascal Robert, where we actually open up the phone lines and you can call and comment or challenge the Mau Mau Man. Speaking of the Mau Mau Man, let's bring in my homie, my dog, co-host extraordinaire, the Robin to my Batman, the Pascal Robert.
Thinking about finding a Robin suit that fits me is something that's going to be so interesting.
Well, J. Andrew World, who is a bit of a cartoonist, I'm sure he's up to the challenge. He made you Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen, which is still pretty cool.
That's correct. Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. We have friend of show, Sean King, on today.
We were talking in the backstage, the virtual green room. If you watched the Patreon After Hours, then you got to hear my tale of getting racism on in Chula Vista Denny's. And we talked about what would have happened had Sean King been there and got racism on with me.
There'd be a GoFundMe in the YouTube video.
Oh, I could have had tears of like, I'm a man. Reparations. And coming live all the way from somewhere in a bunker in Virginia. He's the security guard of Deep State Cuba. Marcus the left wing. That's
the Robin to your D'Angelo.
If we were super friends, I would want to be Jason Momoa Aquaman.
You might have to find somebody else.
The Momoa Aquaman.
Man, you're more like the electricity guy that
and Spider-Man?
Yeah.
Electro?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm a bad guy?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, like that's like I get weird takes off of this, a lot of the Marvel movies. In my head, like I watch most of this shit thinking of like, how are they lying to me about the good guy and why is he actually the bad guy? So was that Jamie Foxx? Yeah,
Jamie Foxx.
He was Foxx really, electricity man.
He was Jamie Foxx electricity. Marcus, that is the ghettoest thing you've ever said. Jamie Foxx electricity man. Not even Ray.
I got that one fucking bootleg DVD. Watch that shit till the wheels fall off. That's all I know about.
We gotta go to LA now and find Jamie Foxx and just fuck with him about that. Electricity man. And she is the voice of reason on this show, but she was not the voice of reason last Thursday because she instigated the 3.5 hour long champagne room. She is the M. Toussaint.
Hello, everyone. So in a day, I went from enabling to instigating. How did that happen? I got my lawyer right here. My accent already out. Already out.
Surprised how many people love the
Oh, we're starting early already.
You are.
We on fleek already today, boy.
I wanted to show. I had a whole trigger warning thing planned in my head, but I hadn't worked it out on the screen. And as I was trying to work it out on the screen, the website was so corrupt that it wouldn't open without causing the whole show to pause. But Cedric Johnson had shared with us in a text chat some fuckery, and we were talking to Marcus about it. And I don't know if M. Toussaint was privy to this. It was basically this dude doing a TikTok. But I found the actually website where the guy got the information from. And he was saying that braids, cornrows, originated during slavery. They were maps to freedom in people's hair.
Oh boy. Allegedly,
It's true. Yep.
Should I say what I said before?
Yeah.
And
Are
that's it.
they maps when Post Malone has them? Maybe not. Maybe not.
What was funnier than that take was the response from people that had never heard it before. And I read the responses, and it was like, right, yeah, of course, right on, of course. You know, this is the history they never teach us.
Because it
Well,
didn't
if
happen.
that's the case, I'm gonna teach you some history too.
And they used their locks to form the rope that led them to escape.
stop.
Yeah. I believe they used to
Oh,
put
my
seeds in their hair.
That's why I do it. Shout out to the ancestors. You know what I'm saying?
That just when I saw that, and then I thought about the barbershop logic that goes into that analysis, made me want to go to barbershops and just make that shit up. Just
Yeah.
to see
Heard
what
somebody
people
doing it.
Oh
So.
man, like there should be a different story for every different.
every-
you know, the
yes,
barbershop, like the barbershop has got the different sections. The picture with all the different hairstyles you can get, with the different black dudes, just like you know,
What does this look like, brother?
exactly. Each different
Maryland.
one needs an origin story.
Well, let's bring in our guest. First of all, look, there's been a lot of comments about the thumbnail picture that we used for the show today. I don't know why you guys think that we're not gonna fuck with Derick Varn. Please, if you haven't, go back and listen to my first interview with Derick Varn, Pascal free. Jokes are always made. Now, I didn't make the Sean King connection at first. One of you people did.
Was M. Toussaint?
It's me.
Was it M. Toussaint?
Yeah.
Okay, look. M. Toussaint started this whole Derick Varn is Sean King thing. And the scary part is, here's the scary part. Never seen both of these motherfuckers in the same place at the same
True
time.
story.
It's like Humpty Hump and Shock G,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Varn admitted their moms look alike.
He admitted on stream in
Mhm.
the champagne room
Yes, it did.
that they're from a similar region of Georgia. They both have white mothers and suspect dads.
It's crazy, but you know, my brother's mom looks like my mom too.
Nice.
So, you know, Derick Varn, all of his righteous indignation at the left that you see one side of Twitter totally covers his other Twitter persona. which is a racial cash grabist. That's what he
Technical
is.
term.
He gets a little tanner, right? He gets like a little like soul man tannish. And then I don't know, and next, I don't know where he gets all these videos of black people getting their ass whooped. What kind of intel do you have before the cops even get done downloading the body cam footage? Sean King has all the footage of an ass whooping. These are the questions you really need to ask Derick Varn, not about the economy. You need to ask him, Derick King, how do you get all the footage before everybody else? Is this pre-set up? I don't know. But please welcome. He is the host of Varn Vlog. He is a silent member of the TIR family. He's kind of like the sometimes why the TIR family. He is the Derick Varn. Oh, wow. There he is.
Hello.
Welcome.
Varn, no outrage by all of this ribbing?
Nah, I don't get mad about ribbing. The comments that I look like Sean King have been coming now for almost 2 years. So.
Can I just tell you real quick? Steve, chat member, said that Varn is one trip to a black barbershop away from being absolute twins with Sean King. So when you finally meet Jason in real life, you gotta head down to the black barbershop, make it complete.
The sad part is because of where Varn lives currently, it's a little harder for him to find a black barbershop.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
Might
and
have to go to
like
somebody's garage.
Varn, maybe this is just like a good way to get some expression, you know, just to get out, try new things. Just like literally just go out there and see like if you can like walk in on one of his events and like pretend to be him.
Take the chat.
I think there's about 50 pounds difference in her actual size. So
Yeah, but like I mean, do people know that?
COVID. Everybody put on a little something.
Yeah, COVID
Yeah.
weight. You're like, this is just COVID weight.
Yeah,
You
man.
got this. You got this.
Here to
You
do
got
the work.
I think you should do it. I think you should do it. I've been tagging Sean King in a lot of our ribbing, and he doesn't retweet this shit. I don't think he finds it as funny as we do.
I would guarantee that he doesn't.
You know who he did retweet though?
Who?
Jessica San Luis. She has like
Really?
5 followers, and she said something about London Breed, and that motherfucker retweeted it.
It's hilarious.
It is hilarious. I'm like, dude, I'm trying to get you to fucking retweet some of our shit, and he's like, no. So fuck you, Sean King.
Damn. Varn, you gonna take that shit?
I mean, look, this is a lot nicer than Norm Finkelstein calling Paul Prescott Talcum X.
That was hilarious.
That was a classic.
Came out the gate with that.
That was a classic.
That was like, hello, Talcum X. Like,
Yeah.
they just
Finkelstein
met.
walks in like a rapper.
Well,
I
that's
came
what
to
they
the
used to
door.
do.
I said it.
Well, you know,
And that was the
Norm
fir-
dropping
yeah.
bodies,
Was that the-
man. Oh,
Norm recently had a debate with Breonna Joy Gray.
I saw. Let's
No
not
comment
even
on
go in terms of.
Yeah, no comment on air.
No comment.
Lawyer on lawyer violence.
No
We don't
comment
agree
on
with that.
But my man C Derek Varn, that we have you here now to talk about the global economy.
yeah.
Varn, you know, you and I often chat offline about current events of the world today. So currently, right, we also, as you know, we had Dan Besner on Tuesday, and we had some interesting commentary from Cuba on Thursday. And what's fascinating to me is, and I know you watched the Besner episode,
Mhm.
Besner's his assessment that American empire is in a perennial state of decline. and the various factions of the global foreign policy elite and where they're posturing their politics relative to that. In the current moment, where we have the post-COVID-19 economic instability, the sanctioning of Russia vis-a-vis its invasion of Ukraine, the forecasting of potential recession in the face of the fact that quarter one we had negative GDP growth, and some people are forecasting that quarter two will probably be the same, which according to old school definitions means actual recession. What is the state of what some would call neoliberal capitalism today and its internal crises and contradictions? C Derek Varn.
That's an easy one, right?
Yeah,
it's
4
fun.
hours. Here we go.
It's softball.
So I mean, I think we've been in a long economic malaise because neoliberalism ran out of steam in 2005.
Why do you say 5 and not 8 like everybody else?
Because having to repackage bad fiscalized assets in the kinds of ways that they were doing around 2004, 2005, which led to 2008, indicated that they had no real places to get profit returns on. So this was an indication of the flagging of the system. Now, at that time, global neoliberal capital could actually still outsource stuff to the developing world to find its return on profits, particularly in China. The deep liberalization of the 1980s, and I notice I say liberalization, not neoliberalization, because it's like China didn't so much neoliberalize as liberalize during the early Deng period. And by liberalization here, just so people know what I mean marketizing things that are not traditionally marketized in socialist states, or even in capitalist ones, to be honest. I mean, like, the marketization was so deep, for example, that like both socialized medicine in the countryside in China and public schooling, which I don't think people realized, was more or less completely privatized in the rural countryside. Wasn't completely done so in the cities. That was in the 80s. It's in the early 80s. So and in the late 70s, right after Mao died. Why does this matter, though? It also meant that China at the time, and it's specifically only China, had a GDP of like 11 to 12%. And if you can roll back your capitalist overlord days and think about what they were saying in 2008 and 2009, they were predicting that China was going to collapse because of political instability and rural poverty. If it hit below 8% GDP growth. Now it's hit below 8% GDP growth since 2011. It didn't collapse because at the end of the Hu Jintao period and indefinitely picking up in the Xi Jinping period, there was a lot of reinvestment in things that were not just for the publicly owned but privately run areas of the Chinese economy.
Now, doesn't China, when they buy a lot of this bad debt from the U.S., as the the economy is starting to collapse, and we're seeing the first year of Obama, so 2008, 2009, isn't China starting to build out a lot of high-speed rail at this time?
Yeah, so what they do is they want to get out of something called the middle income trap. All right, the middle income trap is a developmental phase that most countries get stuck in. The country that didn't get stuck in it was the United States, and I can talk about why later. People who have heard me go on spills know the history on this, and it has to do with empire. But China decides that it needs to up its tech sector, really up its investment in R&D, not try to be the producer of last resort for cheap capital, and to develop an internal consumer economy in its major cities. Actually, pretty smart. Well, I know people aren't going to be happy when I say this, but how they decide to do this is actually mirroring what the U.S. did in the 50s. So what the Politburo comes up with and is really enacted under Xi is the Belt and Road Initiative. It's brilliant, actually, and I think people should understand what it is. It is basically a non-wartime Marshall Plan for the entire Eurasian landmass.
Mhm.
All right, which would do two things. It provides an alternate financial structure to then the G8, now the G7, one that was not hostile to the G8, because remember at this time Russia's technically in both blocks. All right, and also they want economic integration with Europe. They want Europe to be more independent from the United States.
Mm.
And they want to do it without the kind of militarized development that you've seen in the U.S. So China has invested heavily in its army, but as I pointed out before, people have contested me on the Blue Order Navy stuff, and I can talk a little about that, but it doesn't invest a lot in what we would see as, if you were building a U.S. style or British style empire, what you would be building into is a massive navy. Now, China does on paper have the second best navy in the world. It doesn't have a lot of blue water capacity, but that means it doesn't have a lot of deep water, intercontinental kinds of ships. It has 3 major carriers. They are top of the line, but that's actually important because what it indicates, against what a lot of the anti-China people say, that China's ambitions are as a regional hegemon and as a globally integrated economic power. Okay, so that's all the back context for now. What it indicates, why they don't, if they were building up a U.S. style navy, it would indicate they were going to be a U.S. style imperial power. They're not interested in that. They have 3 foreign military bases. So the Belt and Road Initiative, ironically, in a lot of ways, however, kind of saved global capital. The other thing that happens is internally, the developed capitalist economies, so that's the British Empire core that you always hear MMTers talking about, plus the EU, plus so think about it, the G7 plus their peripheral countries take up a policy of quantitative easing. Quantitative easing had been tried in Japan in the early 2000s. I can go into the technical differences between quantitative easing and open market operations. A lot of people, and say the MMT crowd, will pretend they're the same. So technically speaking, when the Federal Reserve Bank wants to raise or lower the interest rate, what it does is buy a certain proportion of treasury debts. That's what all the capitalist central banks do. So it's all semi-privatized. So the buying of debt, a lot of the U.S. debt, for example, is owed to itself because that's how they actually operate and change the interest rate. That's called open market operations. What QE does is they start buying the private treasury holdings, so like bonds, back from businesses, right? So the first real test of this is during the 2007 housing crisis. Where did all those toxic assets go so they didn't blow up and destroy the banking sector?
China.
During QE, they were purchased as QE assets and they exploded on the Federal Reserve. Well, think about when the Federal Reserve buys stuff like that and cordons it off. If it explodes because it's a bad investment, no one pays a price for it. All right. If it happens on the open market, someone does. During this time period, there's something called the QE effect. Now, the people in the Fed say they were creating money with this. This was a backdoor way to create additional money when they got the interest rate close to zero. Mm-hmm. What they were probably doing was creating a speculative environment. So this is why, until the end of COVID, it seemed like no matter what happened in the actual real economy, the stock market wouldn't fall. That's historically weird. All right. So it means.
So basically, what you're saying is that the Federal Reserve was buttressing the economy from the 2008 crash all the way up until COVID.
I mean, yep. Would you agree though, everybody here, that post 29 systems have been put in place to never have a depression to that level again?
No. I believe that they tried to do that. Mm-hmm. Kind of like, there's a couple problems, and COVID is what exposed the problems. So, one, what this was doing was shielding the results of the depression, but actually it creates something in conventional economics called moral hazard, meaning that people start investing in bullshit. Because what this can't do, all right, what this QE can't do is make traditional commodity production, the production of physical, real stuff, more profitable.
Yeah.
All right. And what you did not see because the Democrats decided to not really go this route was a massive amount of investment in actual physical infrastructure.
You said there was not a massive.
There was not in the West. Not in the United States. Let me say, actually, there was some in Europe, but not in the United States. There were some road patches. There's some stuff theoretically thrown.
No, there was. I mean, again, when we compare it to what happened in China, nothing at all happened. And I think a lot of people at that time were voting for the outsider to help get us out of this mess and do some investment, because there were some promises, campaign promises, that we were going to see our way out of this mess that wasn't going to involve bailing out more banks.
Right. Well, I mean, bailing out the banks was always going to happen. All right. For people, I remember leftists at the time and some libertarians were like, let the banks fall. I'm like, no, it would lead to a total collapse of the monetary system because you don't understand how profitability works.
But there was the illusion of, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there was the illusion of initially with the Obama administration that there was going to be relief for homeowners that were now underwater in extremely inflated properties. Pascal and I were in the real estate industry in certain capacities during this time, and the markets were so inflated. It was silly to loan, $800,000 for a home in Stockton, California, that at best is only worth $150,000. So, right, everyone walked away from their houses. So we had literal ghost towns in America for years. We still, to a degree, do.
No,
and there was no bailout of actual people, even though there was supposed to be funds set aside for that.
Basically, all the funds went into buying up these toxic assets and hiding them from the market. Thus, private. It's a cliche, but it's actually a true cliche. The whole privatized gain, socialized losses. That's what this did. But it began to do it not just in the housing sector, but increasingly during COVID to the entire economy. Now, I want to point out a couple of things. All right. Traditionally speaking, for example, people have known that the app tech sector, after its crash in 2000, was not super productive. What did we see during this time period? What did we see during this time period of development in the West? And I'll get back to the Chinese stuff later because it's important and it's going to probably rain on a lot of other people's parades. But the what you saw is pretty clear. You had tech development go gangbusters because it seemed like it was, again, like in the late 90s, a high profit sector. But the tech development stuff is all in rents.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for people who don't understand classical political economy, rents are actually something that people like Adam Smith fought against. I know that sounds strange, but the feudal economy, for example, is basically a rents economy. The entire economy is based on rents, with the king being the literal owner of the entire sovereign state. Like, they own all the land technically. All royalty and nobility that owns land owns it at the lease of the king. All right. The bourgeois revolutions and the shift to a bourgeois economy, depending on whether it was internal revolution or external imposed, ended those kinds of relations. This is where like the techno-feudalism stuff comes from. But the reason why I was never super convinced on techno-feudalism is, okay, in feudalism, who produced this shit? Peasants, serfs, slaves.
Mm-hmm.
What do they produce? Food, goods. And techno-feudalism, who produces shit? Who the fuck knows?
What do they produce? Who the fuck knows?
Who the fuck knows? All the sectors of the economy that actually produce physical goods are decrepit. We went over this when we talked about the food crisis,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I've been arguing like you can't shift to techno-feudalism because no one's actually making the things that reproduce society if everyone is in this kind of closed system loop on tech gadgets. And no, robots can't do it. And if you actually look at the physical infrastructure of the internet and the amount of energy that it needs, that's not an out. All right? This energy cost is exponential. People realize this when they look at cryptocurrency, but this is true for the internet at, vast development as a whole. Right? I'll give you an example of that right now from here in Salt Lake City. There are beginning to be limits on what we call the Silicon Slopes, or the kinds of electrical development and server farms that are allowed to happen here in Salt Lake, because we literally don't have enough water to process the electricity that those things require. This stuff is not non-physical infrastructure, right? The problems of the physical economy and the physical world aren't removed by digitalization or by rents. And what COVID did, in a lot of ways, is reminded us of that. So what did they do during the end of COVID? Both Trump and Biden took the QE thing, which had been slightly tapering off around 2017, 2018, and put it on steroids during early COVID. So instead of seeing the stock market crash, which it did initially, it goes gangbusters. Because it seems like no matter what the losses are, QE is going to cover up the toxic investments. But what this has also led is this entire period investment in things that were never super profitable. Amazon was not profitable until like 2017. Mm-hmm. Facebook, Twitter have never been profitable. Look at Elon Musk stuff. They're only profitable recently. All right?
Has Tesla only turned a profit?
Yeah, but you know what's funny? It doesn't produce that much. Most of the profit's based off hype. So what am I saying? I am saying that all these businesses and all these entrepreneurs and all these things that we've seen, this change in capital that we saw, was undergirded by QE for us. Now, flip back to China. All right. China during this time period decides, okay, we're going to do the Belt and Road Initiative. It's going to be a super Marshall Plan. And we're going to develop the 72 economies, most of which are some of the poorest and least sovereign debt credit unworthy in the world. We're going to invest in physical infrastructure, but we're going to do it through pretty low interest loans that are going to be negotiated between sovereign powers. Okay, sounds good. And I want to throw this stuff out. China was not necessarily being altruistic in doing this, nor was it being super imperialistic. So it respected sovereign workforce stuff with the caveat that when it came in, it can use its own workers because it can set up the Chinese infrastructure right, get the technological infrastructure going, and get it locked into Chinese infrastructure as opposed to like generic US infrastructure. Okay. It was going to replace the World Bank, be an alternative to the World Bank for these countries to lean on. It was going to use this to shift its economy into a more developed world core economy focusing on high tech, and it has done so. It's going to develop its middle class, start relieving its internal immigration restrictions. For those who don't know, the system, I can't say it in Chinese. I call it the internal passport system. It's not entirely correct, but there were immigration limitations that I'm not even going to argue were unwise, because it was the idea was during this development period, particularly after the liberalization in the 80s, there was an impoverishment of rural China. All right. Xi, and I want to give Xi Jinping credit for this, really does start to reinvest into the rural sector of the country. This is why he's so popular. This is why he has so much political legitimacy within China itself, because there was an impoverization of the Chinese country worker, and how it was handled was just not letting them move into the city to become a lumpen. And Xi starts to realize this is not viable, right? So, after the initial kind of sparring with people like Bo Xilai and neo-Maoist groups within provincial level Chinese parties, you start seeing this, and you also start seeing the centralization of the state. China and the Chinese Communist Party, particularly after the 80s, have been a very actually regionally decentralized state. I know it's weird for a communist state, but it's just true. The provinces had a lot of administrative control. And thus, it led to this dynamic that we saw in a lot of labor militancy before Xi took office, where there were protests in different provinces because of the kind of capitalist administration of those particular provinces. And those protests were not against the central government, but to get the central government involved. And that happens. There's still a lot of labor militancy in China, and it's very complicated. Its relationship to the state is complicated. It's technically not formally recognized, but they informally recognize it all the time. Okay. So the Belt and Road Initiative kicks off. Things look good. There's massive development, lots of development in infrastructure. Notice I said that while China's using its workers and it's using its products, and that does breed some resentment because it leads to local workers not being skilled. The other thing, though, that I think can push back against this narrative that China was being imperialistic in this is it let pretty much the countries themselves decide what they needed to do with the Belt and Road funds after the infrastructure was built. And this leads to, as you would expect in a lot of developing countries, a lot of corruption and a lot of misuse of Chinese resources. In Sri Lanka, you can think about this as the Lotus Tower. In Egypt, you can think about building the capital in a new capital in the middle of the desert, so Al-Sisi is away from the major centers of population. And the reason why we can say this is a problem, because these things are not productive to their internal economies. They are not really going to generate any wealth for the people in these countries, which is a problem because it makes them paying back the terms of the loan more difficult. Now, China's done this by loans, but like I said, it really hasn't been setting out debt traps. That's a myth. In Angola, there was potentially a seizure of a port, but they decided for political reasons that it was not worth it. They did seize a port in Sri Lanka to get over to a Chinese company on a 99-day lease, and they have seized mineral rights in Tajikistan, but backed off from seizing mineral rights in Kazakhstan. All right. China is very concerned, and I think legitimately, and I think they really believe this. I don't think this is just PR. With not being an imperialist power, this has sometimes actually led to Chinese workers getting fucked over. I was mentioning off air, for example, Gulf states have a practice of if you work in a company in a Gulf state, the state literally takes your passport away. I don't work in Gulf states when I was abroad for that reason. And Chinese workers have been screwed by this. This is not China screwing its own workers. This is the states that are taking Chinese R&D money from the Belt and Road Initiative and going on and doing things according to local practices. And China will get upset about this and push back on this, but ultimately it respects national sovereignty. Well, that means that it also accepts when these countries misuse or misallocate these funds. Now, really hadn't been a big deal until COVID. All right. Since COVID, there's been, they do. Since COVID, there has been a massive need for China to restructure debt, and often having to lend out refurbished loans in ways that resembles the IMF. For those of people who don't know what the IMF does, and the IMF sucks, but let's talk about what it does and why it sucks. The IMF takes countries that can't service their World Bank or other sovereign debts, and they issue emergency loans for them to do so with a bunch of caveats. And those caveats are the austerity. They create conditions that are good for foreign investors and often bad for locals. Right? China's having to play the role of the IMF in a lot of these circumstances. And it is not doing what the IMF does, but it's led to an internal debate within China itself. Mm-hmm. All right. There are debates about this within the Politburo and within the Chinese press. There is some people who feel like the ambition of the Belt and Road Initiative was too much. All right. And let me put the scale of this to you. Adjusting for inflation, the ambition of the Belt and Road Initiative is 12 times larger than the Marshall Plan.
Wow. That's after adjusting for inflation.
Yes. All right. This investment was the largest investment in worldwide integrated infrastructure the world had ever seen. What it does would have been to create a land and shallow, when I say shallow water here, I don't really mean shallow water, but I mean not blue water, trade network in Eurasia that could be expanded to the Americas, but in a not imperial manner. I mean, I really do think China was really trying not to do capitalist global development without doing imperialism. Right? Mm. We can argue if that's possible. Okay, that's a different question. And I think what we're getting to see is it's going to be hard. So in the last, let's say in the last 2 years, China's had to restructure $52 billion of sovereign debt. Now, this leads us to the great world currency debates and where the left is right now. So there's been a lot of people talking about BRICS developing an alternative currency. And let's talk about what BRICS is. BRICS originally was BRIC-S, all right? Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Originally, this group actually was not even posited by the countries involved. It was posited by a member of the World Bank. So what the World Bank guy observed, and I can't remember who it was, this was in 2001, is that these countries were large, had massive internal markets, they had a large geographical space, and they were seemingly politically kind of close together. Fine, true. The guy also made some caveats. So they had different governments. They had somewhat different strategic interests. The only thing that united them was that they were being kind of shut out of the G8 and only marginally led into the G20. And after 2014, Russia's completely shut out of the G8, formally removed, and you get down to the G7. Okay. We got all that. BRICS, however, is posited as an alternative, but it keeps falling apart because political tensions between India and China are super high. And the economic needs of different groups are pretty great. Like what South Africa, who was added, I think in 2012, adds is and what it can contribute. It's very different than what any other powers can contribute. What you started to see though around 2014 is BRICS countries start hoarding gold, which is something I don't think people have noticed. And I'll talk about what that means. That does not mean we're returning back to a world gold standard. It does not mean that these countries don't believe in the sovereignty of any particular currency. But if you don't trust the global forex currencies, and the global forex currencies right now are the dollar, the euro, to the Japanese yen, and a little bit, I think like 3 or 4% the yuan. China has very strict capital limits on what things can do, which is not great for a forex currency. So like you can't take but so much out. And these capital controls, I think they're actually smart, but that's why the yuan was not more of the forex holdings because of China's size. Is China's control over its currency, the fact that it has two different float systems. Well, one's not really a float. There's an internal peg and there's a free exchange in the world market. There's a whole lot of stuff that makes it not ideal for a reserve currency in capitalist terms.
Can I ask a question real
Mm-hmm.
quick?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that we should invest in gold?
Do what you want personally.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you some things about the U.S. market that probably actually sound like I agree with Besner, even though I also agree with the empire's declining.
Okay.
But if I was holding shit in euros, I'd be worried. I will say that. One thing I'm going to say is that China clearly wanted the Belt and Road integration to go forth before it tried to be a world reserve currency and have at least some open flow. So that leads us to BRICS. BRICS is a political coalition. It doesn't. There's a clear aim against the G7, but their internal politics are highly fragmented, and that's still true, by the way. Like the Ukraine-Russia war has not unified them. So while India and China both tacitly support Russia, and I say tacitly because they don't openly support Russia's claim in Ukraine. They claim neutrality on the actual issue at hand. They just stand up to it against NATO. India works pretty closely with the United States in the development of sea trade in Southeast Asia. And that is a counterforce to China. And if you also think about Xi's politics and Modi's politics, there can't be more different. All right. So the one thing that happened in a lot of BRICS that we haven't talked about is the right-wing populism that we see in the United States. Well, they happened in these places before it happened in the United States, except in China and arguably except in Russia for reasons that are complicated. Although I think Russia's politics are kind of sui generis. So meaning we can't talk about them on the same trend lines. The explosion of right-wing populism in a lot of the countries in BRICS, which is 2 of the 3 big ones, means that the political goals got even more divergent. Okay. But they are kind of unified against the G7. Now, China also needs access to the rich markets of the world, even for its high-tech stuff. It does. All right. Russia needs access to Europe as a primary place to send its gas and oil resources because that's where its pipelines go. It's literally kind of that simple. The problem that you have now is that I think China thought that the situation in Ukraine would lead to Europe developing its own security apparatus, which it seems to be doing, but that would move it away from the United States and NATO, which it is absolutely not doing. I also don't think China really thought that the Ukraine-Russia situation was going to be as intense as it is. China's response seems to have been caught off guard by it. And I think it's in the interest of both the Russian government and the U.S. government to portray China as being more knowledgeable than it was. Russia for reasons of strengthening their relationship, the U.S. for reasons of blaming China for shit that it didn't do, as a major competitor.
Well, and because at that time too, it's like you've got the meeting at the Olympics between Putin and Xi, and basically each side painting that picture of like, hey, Putin saying, listen, they're cool, I gave him the wink and the nod, but then also like the Americans like, Xi was in the planning stages with them and they did it over the luge.
Exactly. Right, which is just not true. There's a bunch of reasons why that you kind of know this is not true. China has made no effort to suppress internal anti-Russian criticism. If it had been collaborating on that, it would have. So I kind of want to dispel both narratives about China right now. One, that China has the capacity to just lead the world, because what's happening now in China is also entering a recession, right? For different reasons than the U.S.
What role is COVID having that?
It's almost totally COVID for them. COVID and supply chain cost, and having to service all these defaults on Belt and Road stuff now is actually really hurting their economy, which means they're probably going to dry up credit to a lot of the 72 nations that rely on them and the Belt and Road. It's not because they're debt trapping. They don't want to debt trap people. That's part of the reason why they're not going to lend. But that means a lot of, between the austerity in the West that we talk about with the Federal Reserve and all that, and China just being like, well, we're not going to do debt traps and we're not going to do this, we can't absorb all these costs for other sovereign nation development. Right? Like this is the flip side of not being imperialist in your development, is you can't just do shit at the cost of your own people forever. All right. So this is when I tell people, like, don't expect China to be hyper altruistic. It's not. No nation would do that. That would kind of be suicidal as a nation, as a national policy. Okay. So you can see now this means we're going to have a credit contraction in the developing world and a credit contraction in the developed world simultaneously. Mm-hmm. COVID has messed up China's plan, and the Ukraine war has messed up China. And the Ukraine-Russian war has messed up China's plan, because the Ukraine-Russian war complicates all of its Belt and Road Initiative stuff in reaching out to Europe. Furthermore, the strength of the dollar, ironically, which emerged out of this, has led for a need for relative de-dollarization. Why? Well, if we have 9% inflation and the rest of the world has similar inflation conditions, and now the dollar is also super strong, that means some of these places are looking at 20, 50% inflation. Sri Lanka right now is seeing 50% inflation, for example.
It's insane.
All right? Like, way back, if you remember, about 6 months ago, I was like, well, if the Fed starts tightening this shit up, it's going to fuck up all these developmental plans for Latin America. And then you also throw into the fact that China's overtaxed because of COVID, and the development of and the Ukraine war, and the development of global supply chains is stalled. Its attempt to make an alternative system to the U.S. deep water trade is stalled. And I want people to understand this. The U.S. built a lot of infrastructure during the Marshall Plan and then stopped. And its maintenance of the global trade network has not been an investment in infrastructure. It's been in military security alone. All right, go through people's head. I want that to sink in. It's been in military security alone. The massive trade networks that we have now are mostly ocean-based, and they don't require a lot of infrastructure. They require a lot of gunships.
Ooh.
All right. Now you can start to see where U.S. develop. And why would the U.S. like this? Well, a bunch of military contractors can make a ton of money. We talk about military Keynesianism as one of the things that was allowed during neoliberalism. The world puts up with it because it actually enables everyone to do global trade. They don't like it, but it enables the entire world's ability to expand. And in a capitalist world system, that's required. All right. So what China was trying to do was to build an alternative for this before it became a reserve currency for the world, before it tried to do the kind of currency things as a counterpower to U.S. currency, which is smart. Build the physical infrastructure before the financial infrastructure. One of the problems I have with a lot of the, say, soft left is they focus almost solely on financial infrastructure first as the means to get the physical infrastructure. This is backwards. All right? This is totally backwards. And if developing nations try to do it, they will get totally fucked. Now, of course, in America, what you're seeing is the neoliberals using this as a way to attack MMT. I'm not a believer in MMT in a strict sense. I think some of it's useful, a lot of it's not. But for people who read that, that's bullshit. That's not what people were doing. Sri Lanka was not doing MMT policies. All right. But what I've also pointed out to people, Sri Lanka can't do MMT policies. All right. It has to purchase too many things from other countries to float everything in an internal currency. And it doesn't have the productive capacity to do that. And MMTers will admit that your productive capacity is actually your economic limit. But they don't talk about that when they talk to the general public. People don't really get what that means. So this is going to be a big problem. And I want people to realize Sri Lanka is not a poor country. Its per capita GDP is better than India's. All right. It was the second richest per capita country. So that's adjusted per person in Southeast Asia. It just collapsed.
I want to really harp in on the Sri Lankan collapse, because what's really disconcerting to me about the Sri Lankan collapse, right, is that a lot of people in the West, particularly the United States, was like, "Oh, this is some backwater country." Sri Lanka was a major economic power.
Yep.
In Asia, this is not a Mickey Mouse country.
This is not a quote banana republic.
No, this is not a banana republic. And what is dangerous is that one of the analyses that's coming out of the Sri Lankan collapse is that it's very likely that this could spread to at least another 5 countries.
Which 5?
Lebanon being one of them. There's 2 other African countries. Well, what are the other countries that are mentioned in terms of potentiality?
South Africa at all?
No, I think.
No.
Is it Mozambique and Zimbabwe?
Mozambique, yeah, they're like 5 countries.
Right. Pakistan is one of the 5. It's about a class.
Wow.
That are being discussed as possibly falling the same way, and this is a confluence of, yes, there was definitely mismanagement. Let's not get it twisted, but this is largely related to COVID, the debt, the sovereign debt crisis, and all of these issues. Exactly. And I'm like, we just had a major country fall apart. Major in the sense of within the larger scheme of things, if you know what I mean. And what I'm saying is that what worries me the most about the Sri Lankan crisis is that it demonstrates to me how much we're kind of in a house of cards territory with these economies. They're all so leveraged on various little nuances of other things that how do we know at any given time, the sandhills can fall on each other? Yes, of course it's not going to happen in the United States because we have so many means economically and infrastructure. Of course, major Western countries may not worry about this. But what about a country like Pakistan? You just said yourself that the per capita GDP of Sri Lanka was greater than India.
Yep, Pakistan is cannot right now, does not look to be able to service its debt. And before people think this is only developing quote developing world problem, and I was going to say a lot of these countries are what we would call middle income countries. They're not developing world countries. They're like Mexico is not a developing world country either, despite the way people talk about it. It's a middle income country. The pigs, that's Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, also having debt crises. Again, with the same bonds and the same trouble that they have with the EU and the EU's 3% rule in its constitution that binds its currency. So Europe also has these problems in its quote periphery. All right. So we have 5 countries hit by this stuff happen with this contraction in the Belt and Road world, and then we have at least 4 of the European countries having similar contractions. Furthermore, while Russia's done better against the sanctions than anyone expected, and I don't know why they expected the sanctions to work, to be honest. It was hurt by the sanctions. What Russia did is it put really strict capital controls on to stop capital flight, and flipped where the ruble transferency happened so that the Russian state banks could get lots of forex currency. All right. Ironically, people didn't realize that, making people buy things in rubles actually means that Russia has a lot of euros that it can trade on the open market to get stuff. It's not a sign that like the ruble is a world currency. It's actually the opposite. But it did shore up the ruble from internally collapsing. But we can't really know what the ruble trades in the world market because most people aren't trading it. Okay, so there's that. The Russian economy, Gazprom is fading off. It is cutting stuff back. We actually don't know why. It could be to punish Europe and to kind of move its energy infrastructure over to China. But the thing is, the physical infrastructure for that still has not yet been built, meaning like you don't have the massive pipelines like you do go into Europe. Now, in natural gas, it's a little different than oil. If you shut down an oil field, it actually starts to not work immediately. You can shut down a national gas pump for a while without the infrastructure starting to collapse. So maybe that's what's going on. We don't really know. All right. So what we have here is a slight contraction, and for people who think Russians aren't hurting, they are hurting. It's just that the sanctions are not going to shore the economy entirely, and we should expect it to. Okay, the Russian economy is primarily in a few things. This is actually a problem, but they're very important things. They're energy and food. As I made that point on Thursday in the Champagne Room. Like, Russia's GDP may only be that of Italy's, but it's all in food and energy, right? Now, that is a problem for the Russian people and for the economic development and consumer goods. But that means Russia has a lot of leverage because where the fuck else is Europe going to get its energy, right? European growth, as I've said on my channel, and I've said it on your channel in the Champagne Room, has been partially predicated on 2 things. The Blue Water Trade Network that it got after the Marshall Plan in U.S. development. That's why all the social democratic countries are dependent on imperialism. When a lot of people say that, they don't really even know what it means, but that's why. All right. 2, cheap energy from Russia in the last 15 years. Well, the U.S. empire is probably fading, and if U.S. development continues the way even some conservatives want it to go, the U.S. is going to start looking at being a regional hegemon. By the way, for people who posit multipolarity, which I think is neither good nor bad, it's just a fact, that's what it means.
When you say a fact, an inevitability?
Yes. Globalization, let me put it this way. No one power could ever have supported a global trade network forever, even as an imperial power, because how does it grow? Think about it. If it controls the world markets and world access to markets, once it's got access to everybody, there's not any more places for it to get cheap super profits from. It can't always benefit from it. It will inevitably, anthropically even, as almost like a law of physics, decline. It will also spread out its supply lines too far. This is even something that happened pre-capitalism. This is what destroyed the Roman Empire. This is what destroyed the Mongol empires. This is what destroyed the Chinese empire. There's only so much you can do because physical infrastructure and actual logistics sets your limits as a nation. All right? So it was going to decline. That was inevitable. It's actually, what's amazing is how fast it did. But if we think about the fact that the secular crisis of the United States really came before neoliberalism with the end of Fordism, right? It's really all the way back in 1974. Then it actually makes more sense. That, like, when we became the global hegemon, we had already been declining for 20 years.
Can you explain for people real quick what Fordism is?
Okay, Fordism is the kind of American answer to social democracy. Keynesian development privately oversawn by corporations. All right. So, like, we have social welfare goods in the United States, but they're all privately provided.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why do our employers provide our insurance? That's a Fordist concept. Right? The idea was the government will support the employers, and the employers will support the employees. So we don't have to have a big welfare state. We'll have a minimal welfare state. We will have one, but and we'll do this through Keynesian fiscal policy, but not through like massive European social welfare, so it doesn't look like communism. That's what it was.
Because your employers, it's your family, right? They're going to take care of you like family.
Right. That's what Fordism was, and that's why that period in the U.S. was a little different than in Europe, because Europe was more okay with the state doing it directly. The United States has always wanted private actors to be the providers, even if it was provided for by backdoor state incentives, backdoor state investment, etc. That all really ends in 1974 to 1978, right? People think it ends with Reagan. It's really over in the mid-70s. That's because of a crisis of profitability and the oil shock. Okay, now this is where I'm going to agree with Besner. There are some things about the U.S.'s situation as a declining empire that where people think it's just going to immediately collapse. It might, but it will be for internal political reasons or because of the things that are going to fuck every country. Mm-hmm. All right? So I'll talk about those conditions. One, the U.S. and North America in general is food secure and energy secure. And people didn't really pay attention, but during the Obama administration, quietly, North America became energy independent at a cost. The cost is fracking, the cost is oil stuff, but we don't really need foreign oil. Our interventions in the foreign oil market is about political goals and about stabilizing the price in the global market so that we don't have like hard policy controls, direct policy controls, but we have the physical oil to do it for now. Everybody's going to have problems. We're going to have an energy crisis coming anyway. But
wasn't there problems at this point because we kind of shut down a lot of the fracking?
So we have shut down some of the fracking. We still have plenty of oil reserves. The other issue, the bigger issue is we outsource a lot of the processing of oil because we had our internal periphery, which is the South. I know people don't like me to say that, but it's true. Well, unfortunately, during climate change, all those refineries in the South, they're, kind of just sitting there to be hit by hurricanes. Just saying. So,
which is a thing that people don't understand. There's a season and those rigs topple over all the time.
Right. So now there's just this development. Our development has been to outsource refining to other countries. But we have the raw crude. And we have the refining technology. We're just not using it. All right. There are other problems that we have, superconductor problems and stuff. That's a kind of bigger deal. But so there's that. We have the food capacity and corn. Now everyone's wheat crops are being fucked over by climate change, but we have the food capacity in corn. If we were to use corn in a more traditionally productive method than we do, and we don't for path dependent reasons, for hangovers of the New Deal, actually, for energy development reasons, etc.
And the energy ethanol.
Yep,
we stopped selling it off to ethanol.
Exactly. We sell 20% of our corn or something like that to ethanol development, which is stupid because ethanol is not even the justification that it was going to reduce carbon footprints. It doesn't even seem to be true because the amount of petroleum and nitrogen fertilizer you have to use to grow it. Anyway, so we have the capacity. We don't have it properly allocated, but our state doesn't seem to have the political will or even the know-how to reallocate the resources that we have. So while we have the capacity, we have political problems and internal tensions are making it very hard to redevelop what we need to do. Furthermore, we have a lot of sunk costs because our infrastructure was built in the beginning, and I think this is something people don't really understand about infrastructure development. Who develops the infrastructure first, when they go to redo their infrastructure, actually has more cost in redoing it because you have to you have to literally remove the old infrastructure or build over it, right? So you either don't get gains for its prior development, or you even have losses for having to remove it. It's why, for example, the internet in the United States, even though it's one of the earliest internets, took so long to get caught up to like even a third of what South Korea's internet was, because South Korea built an internet way later with a better original infrastructure than we did. And internet's not even that hard to fix. Like, even though there's a lot of physical infrastructure involved, most of the problems with it come with energy. It's just laying cables. But think about like Atlanta. I'm gonna use Atlanta, one of my favorite cities. Is in constant water shortage. It's not because of lack of rain. Atlanta is in drought, not because of lack of rain, but because the amount of water it requires to service its population is ever increasing, and rain just kind of isn't. But the other problem is Atlanta's water infrastructure was built in the 1910s and 20s. I want you to think about that. So it's highly inefficient and it's decaying. But how are you going to pull it up? You have this entire modern city that's ever expanding built on top of it.
Well, isn't that one of the problems with Flint?
Yep. That's a problem with a lot of cities.
Yeah.
And
California.
Not just
the Bay Area has that problem.
Well, and that's like, the thing too is that like the point is and I'm happy that Varn like does these pauses of like let it sink in, because when you let it sink in, it's not just, hey, the road that gets to my house is under construction, right? They're gonna have to tear out every pipe in the house in Flint. Mm-hmm. And there's like hundreds of communities, right, where it's like the actual pipes are fucked up.
Most of these pipes
all the way going into the house. And yeah,
these are like New Deal projects in a lot of these major metropolitan areas. Even where I'm from in the Bay Area, it was where the water was coming from Flint. I mean, there's a documentary upon documentary and literature to read about what happened with Flint and their water. But what Varn is bringing up is a very important fact that we haven't invested in our own infrastructure in this country since the New Deal.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just like especially with Atlanta, that city, it's 4 cities. Atlanta's 4 cities stuck together, and the idea of redoing that infrastructure is a massive investment onto itself, where you're literally reallocating, or you're like relocating millions of people in order to get this project done, with the plan for them to move back home in a few years. It's a huge
and it's never on the what's funny to me is it's never on the table. Varn is so hitting the nail on the head with the fact that we live in modern cities that are built around suburbanization. So when you talk about doing major, usually metropolitan infrastructure plans. You're talking about huge inconveniences of traffic and, you know, shutdowns of entire areas and major thoroughfares that no one wants to deal with.
Right.
It's on no politician's plate to try to inconvenience their base.
I would assume that we have something called a public goods form of governance in this country. God forbid we have that.
I mean, I'll go so far. This is my Debbie Downer side because of what I've been working on. I just think the people as a whole, not that, you know, 50 people watching the show, but, you know, people as a whole just don't want to be inconvenienced.
Oh yeah.
Well, because who's going to bear the cost of that inconvenience, though?
Say again?
Who's going to bear the cost of that inconvenience? I mean,
I get it. And this is the contradiction. But trying to inconvenience someone, look, how many times have everyone on this screen and everyone watching seen road work and been like, oh God, they're working on the road? Yeah.
No, I always cheer. I cheer for them. I give them water. I say I'm happy that our government invested in jobs and infrastructure. And I shake their hand.
I live in a country, Marcus, where there's no retaining wall for the mountains I have to drive through to get to the border on the quota, which is kind of like a freeway. So one day it was storming and I was going to pick up my daughter from the airport. And it's very dark when I'm leaving and it's not very well lit, as you can imagine. And I was like, oh shit, there was just a massive landslide.
Yeah.
What do you do when that happens when you don't? I mean, these are infrastructure problems that no one wants to talk about. You're going to tell me that there's not American roads? I've been on every interstate in the continental U.S.
So there's a whole lot of moralizing in the chat. In response to this, I want to respond to this a little bit. I am normally a pedestrian. I fucking hate cars. I own a car. I use it a lot, but I hate it. I hate it. When I lived in other countries, I didn't use it. All right. The American infrastructure is entirely car-based.
Mm-hmm.
If you live in a few very rich cities or in very specific neighborhoods, which has now become a wealth marker. So in the 90s and aughts, there was this whole walkable city thing. I think what I'm going to say is going to piss two different groups of people off. Right? This was pushed by even people like James Howard Kunstler. All right? Here's the problem. Two things happen to the walkable cities. They either become hyper gentrified and it becomes the ability to be a pedestrian actually becomes a luxury and pushes the poor out into the suburbs, which has happened, all right, in most of the cities, right? So now you have this weird thing in a lot of cities that were gentrified is like you have a core that was left out and left to rot between the 70s and the 90s, but became gentrified in the aughts and aught teens. And then you have a kind of donut in the immediate suburbs around the city that have increasingly become poor. And then you have an even richer suburb further out. So you have a triple donut where it used to be just one, right? And then you have all this core stuff. But it makes walkability a moneyed access thing, right? And I want people to think about that. We push the poor people into the suburbs and out of the inner city. What did we do? Well, we pushed them where there was even less infrastructure for them. So when people are like, oh, I'm a pedestrian, you know, I'm not saying you're wrong about that, but in most cities, you literally cannot be a pedestrian and get to work, right? Yes, there's public transit, but it's not reliable enough to get to work.
Yeah.
And it's expensive.
Yeah. Compton. Yeah. I mean, Los Angeles is a perfect example of everything Derek is talking about. All the hoods are out in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And now we have something called suburban hoods.
Yeah.
There's legit suburban, cities built in the 80s that are hood.
This is so just aggravating that, this is not America is not a broke ass country.
Nope.
Okay. We have some of the best universities in the world in this country, in cities all over the country, in states all over the country. It's supposedly the richest country in the world. We can't do the basic stuff to fix our problems.
Because it doesn't make, if it doesn't make money, it doesn't make sense to people, right? I mean, think about our research and development sector and science. What are we creating in this country, Pascal? Like, I'm asking that question
Knife
seriously.
missiles sponsored by Raytheon TM.
These great minds that go to university, they go there to make money. They go there to have the next big tech startup. I'm going to take something that already exists, privatize the shit out of it, monopolize the shit out of it. There is a company in the world that we exist in of podcasting, right? This company must have got a bit of infused dollars for advertising, and they're going the podcast route, called Manscaped. It is a electric razor for your testicles.
I've heard of them.
Pascal, yeah. I don't believe in my soul that there is scientists somewhere trying to shave different kinds of nuts and see which way these nuts can be shaved for maximum shaveability and comfort.
Well, you haven't been on one of these woke campuses lately, Jason.
Can I? No. Well, one of the things that frustrates me about the whole wokeness wars, right? Okay, one, I do think that's actually the kind of behavior that's launched the IDW and all that bullshit was real, but very limited to very elite campuses. I've never seen that on a state school that was not an elite state school that grants PhDs and is expensive. And you know, yeah, it's annoying, and it's an inner elite fight. But I think that Pascal, I was thinking about what you're saying, and this is where. So, I'm going to say something to surprise people because it's going to be sympathetic to Catherine Liu, and people know.
Why are you so mean to Catherine Liu? Don't be mean to her when I'm here, because I know
Catherine Liu and I have become Twitter frenemies. I actually really respect a lot of her stuff. We disagree on one thing, and it's a technical class argument. But here's what we agree on: we have the most educated elite the world has ever fucking seen in the United States, but it's incapable of doing almost anything. Now, there's reasons for that. Some of that is dollars, but I'm going to actually say something that's going to probably make people uncomfortable. Some of that is specialization and complexity. All right? We don't have people who are generally educated. Somebody was criticizing me on Facebook the other day because they were like, well, Varn, you know more about more stuff than probably most of anybody commenting on the left, but you don't know everything very deeply. And I'm like, yeah, but you can't know everything and be a specialist in everything. Jack
of all trades, master at none.
Yeah, but let's finish that phrase. The phrase should be jack of all trades, master of none, but it's definitely better than being a master of one. Right?
That is what
so we have two problems, all right, but let's even get past that. Okay, we have the capacity here. Someone was commenting about we could balloon lay these kites. Yeah, we could, all right, but still the cost to do that in every city in the United States over the scale of a country as big as the US is disproportionately expensive. And now let's get into the legal problems and the legal contradictions of the US has currency sovereignty. All right. It can pretty much print as much currency as it wants. We don't peg to anyone else because we produce shit. I know people don't think we produce because we don't employ people in production, but we are either the second or third largest producer of physical commodities on the planet any given year. And the physical commodity trades between Europe, the developing world, China, and us are integrated. All right. So it's also like something's going to be built partly here, partly in China, partly in Mexico anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we don't produce stuff. It's just mostly produced by robots. It's that we have not been reinvesting in anything since the New Deal, but there's also legal reasons why. All right. Who's in charge of most of this development in the United States? The states, not the federal government. And the only time the federal government even legally can invest in some of these things is when it does so for defense or as back blocks to these various states.
So you're saying federalism is one of the obstacles to our ability to do things as a nation?
Absolutely. The Constitution is a limit and an excuse for neoliberal development.
I mean, that's another thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Varn. I'm sorry.
No.
I think that's another thing that we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure plans. Even when Biden was talking about the Wi-Fi everywhere, what was there was a name he had for it in part of his infrastructure plan. There's going to be public Wi-Fi, like that would
like broadband.
Broadband, yeah. That would have been a situation where private companies would have been doing that build out.
Yeah,
and there was not enough money even in that proposed plan to do something like that.
Well, that's that's where like and to the point of like Varn was making, especially like what goes on in these universities, and like it's just like a whole lot of fart sniffing, and like and like dissecting every molecule, right? But it's like a lot of like just like cycling through these same tired ass ideas and like figuring out things that continually just don't work again and again and again. And so that's where like, any of these infrastructure plans, anything that comes with like, that's going to come out of any liberal, neoliberal, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to be in the realm of reality to be able to like, to really go to the root of the issues, all of the problems. Like no one wants to deal with like federalism. No one actually wants to talk about like the state, even if they are a part of the state. No one wants to deal with these structures. And you'll have like, this is what Democrats, a lot of libs, you get what you want if the Senate goes away. But they'll argue for the Senate existing. And like, how do you make sense of that? I don't know,
Well, here's the problem. Like, it's beyond that. Like, let's say you get rid of the Senate and the Supreme Court. All right. What the Social Democrats want. You have 50 state structures with 50 different legal apparatuses. Mm-hmm. Which is why you can't get election reform, which is why you can't get, and this is all constitutional. And look, I actually understand some of the regional concerns about this, because what certain countries that have had this kind of development have, you can look at Mexico, you can look at France, is the imperialization of its own state into a central core too. All right. Mm. And compounding problems. I actually understand that threat. All right. I don't think it's made up. I don't think it's all just racism. It's historically based in racism, but the thing is, when people are like, well, the states should be in charge of that. Yeah, but the states can't print their own money. And unless the states can print their own money, they can't control their own development.
I have almost no tolerance for states' rights arguments, man. I would smash all these Mickey Mouse states with a federal hammer like that to get shit done.
If I had my way, I would have a North American Union, and a lot of these provinces and states would be consolidated into larger administrative districts that had pretty central. It might have pretty central power, but we're balanced in population and this, that, and the other. And that I'm not. There's a limit to my belief in centralization that is beyond our scope of today's conversation. But in America, the states' rights stuff doesn't really hold sway. Like, I mean, there isn't a reason why North and South Dakota even exist administratively, other than for political shenanigans. There's also not a reason why California is one state, other than political shenanigans, a historical accident, right? This stuff doesn't really make sense. It's not rational. It's not even good. Like, it's not even good for a lot of conservatives. Not that I really care if it's good for conservatives, but it's not. So we have a legal problem because our system doesn't make sense. And let's think about how our system developed, okay? 13 settler colonial colonies that were independent governments chartered by the British Crown, make a coalition kind of like the EU. That doesn't work because they can't centralize a currency or develop a bank or anything. And they're fighting a foreign power. So they make a weird constitution that empowers the federal government on some things, but not others. Those states, however, have separate legal systems, which the federal government could not interfere, which is why stuff like state religions could happen at the state level and stuff historically in the United States till the Civil War. Civil War happens for purely political reasons, not because of the goodness of the Republicans' hearts. Not that the radical Republicans were actually on our side, I will say that, but the Republicans were a fucked up coalition even back then. You get the 13th and 14th Amendment, which kind of gives the federal government supremacy and makes federal law nullify state law on some things. But there's still the 9th and 10th Amendment, which counteract it. And the Supreme Court basically adjudicates whether the 14th Amendment or the 9th and 10th Amendment applies. Right? So it's never been coherent. All right? That's a fundamental problem in the U.S. It's not particularly democratic. It's not particularly, and it's not designed to be. But it also means that the only way that the U.S. legally can do a lot of infrastructure is to tie it to the military. Because that constitutionally is something the federal government has control over. Which is this weird path dependency thing that co-aligns with imperial development. So you have the U.S. inheriting the British Empire effectively. The expansion of the Marshall Plan. But then you have the fact that it immediately meets both internal and external and legal roadblocks for an 18th century legal development was not designed for a country to be this big and for even a unified country to develop out of it. You can even see it in like the way we refer to ourselves. We refer to ourselves in plural until the Civil War. Like it's like the way the EU thinks of itself now. That ends with the Civil War. We don't make sense. Legally, we don't make sense because we are actually a perfectly capable super polity, but we can't administer ourselves and we have legal blocks to doing so, but it happens to be really conveniently tied into empire. But this is why for all the people who are like, why can't we just vote away the military and get schools? Let me tell you what happens if you vote away the military. The international trade system collapses.
Well, here's a question. Why can't we use the military then for infrastructure projects on a federal level?
It does. Happens in limited capacity through the Army Corps of Engineers, but like, you know, the United States government is using them. So underfunded, underutilized, which like the Army Corps of Engineers, it could just be like the Corps of Engineers, like like that's like what it should be. But yeah, limited uses within the United States.
So let's talk about that. All right. Because military Keynesianism, I make a big deal out of it. It's been holding the country together. Mm-hmm. But we haven't talked about military neoliberalism on top of military Keynesianism. 60% of the U.S. military is technically mercenaries. Now, it doesn't mean that 6% of the soldiers are mercenaries. It means that they contracted out all the internal services. I think Marcus can back this up. To about 80,000 different military contractors.
All the cooking is done by third parties. The cleaning's done by third parties.
It is like numbers. It was 2 to 1. No, it was 50 to 1 in Vietnam. 50 service members to 1 contractor, Vietnam era. Now you've got 2 to 1 in the reverse. Every 2 contractors, you've got one military member. It has exploded.
Yeah. So basically, you have a large public money giveaway being run through the military that really, really began in the late 1990s under Bill Clinton and then went into hyperdrive during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, which was a way to roll back military Keynesianism and start military neoliberalism. To apply neoliberalism to one of the 2 areas of society that were exempted from during the Cold War. All right, during Fordism, and even during the neoliberal part of the Cold War, so that's the late 70s and the 80s and the early 90s, the 2 sectors of society that were exempt from neoliberal logic were the academic institutions and the military. What has happened in the last 20 years is those have been neoliberalized too. So now there is no longer any incentive to use these institutions for anything other than money grabs. And for people who think this shrunk the size of government or whatever, that's objectively false. All right. Like government spending and government largesse and government direct intervention into the economy has actually expanded at a massive rate during the neoliberal period, not contracted. That's all. The contraction was a way to sell it to you. It's all a myth. What they were doing was marketizing non-marketized functions, but still using public money to do it. And that is inefficient. It's highly inefficient.
Public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships.
Exactly. Anytime you hear public-private partnership, that's neoliberal.
I was gonna say too is like effectively when you talk to is like when you talk like DoD, any like Pentagon versus the military contractors, the defense and weapons manufacturers, like they're just changing uniforms, you know, and like it's like Lloyd Austin had to get a waiver, you know, because it was so close. He was just getting off the board of Raytheon, but like literally every single Secretary of Defense has been has some type of link to the military industry. You know, it's like they're really just changing off the jackets and paychecks, right? You know, one place you get political legitimacy, the other place you get a few $1 million in stock options. But essentially, it's all the same thing. They're the foreign policy that we're adhering to. Like they're coming in the same circles, and it's both the defense industry with these, Pentagon officials, and it's all the same shit.
But isn't that the problem with most of these appointments? I mean, there's a story in the news that just broke that no one really cared to talk about, which was the Geo company that does private prisons. The man that's the CEO of Geo just left a government position as the head of ICE.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. I actually fight private prisons as some of the activism I do. And so for people who think Varn is just a bloating media, I'm a teacher and I'm also an activist. And I operate in educational activism and in my union. And I activate specifically against private prisons and privatizing of anti-immigration stuff through ICE. And let me tell you one of the scariest things that about the United States. The largest real estate holdings in the U.S. are a lot of these private prison, private detention center developers through DHS contracts. They have some of the most large real estate development contracts for the federal government in existence. So what we have in a very real sense is a cannibalized elite. That is why we're screwed. It's political. Now, compare us to Europe. Europe's fucked, by the way. I want people to get that through their head. Europe is fucked. All right. But Europe's problems are as much geographic and demographic and material as they are political. They have political problems too. The EU as a governing operation really doesn't make sense. That's why stuff like Brexit, as dumb as it was economically, has popular support because the government apparatus of the EU is highly undemocratic and very strange. But let's really look at why Europe is fucked. Europe has a high population. It's never been particularly agriculturally productive. It's either been reliant on North Africa, which it can't be anymore, or on Central Asia, Eastern Europe for its grain since like almost any time they've tried to expand. That was true in the Roman Empire. That was true in the Renaissance. That was true during the accumulations of the great European empires and the turns to capitalism. Europe has not ever been food sufficient. It's also not energy sufficient, and it doesn't have a lot of resources. I mean, look at it geographically. Europe is tiny and has a huge population for its physical landmass. And when I say Europe is tiny, I'm excluding Russia in this. All right. But the Eurozone is actually like you could fit all of Europe in the United States pretty easily. Just it would not even be half of it. Physical resources are going to be a real problem for them. Particularly if the US is not securing it and they're not able to join up with China. and so that's a huge problem. Okay, let's talk about these other larger. We've been focusing on the U.S. a while, but I want people to think. I want people to get out of their head that like any one country or region's going to save anybody, because they're not. So Russia proposed a BRICS currency in the last week. It's interesting that Russia does it because you really need China to propose it and run it for it to be viable. China's been very quiet on that. China has been kind of forced into being a reserve currency as central banks are buying whatever kinds of currency they can to diversify their reserve currency basket to weaken the dollar. And I don't mean weaken the dollar as in de-dollarize, although that's going to happen as a side effect a little bit. But I mean as like they need something that's cheaper to buy than the dollar right now. So they're purchasing yuan, they're purchasing Korean won, they're purchasing Swedish krona, Swedish krona, etc. So like a whole stock of currencies that are not normally large reserve currencies and because the euro's value is kind of plummeting in this energy crisis, and we're not even going to talk about the UK. The UK is experiencing like 12% inflation. It's going to have severe unemployment soon. It has no clear trade. It's politically screwed itself. It's losing its ability to run everything off of high finance, which is what it's done since the end of its empire, particularly since the 70s. It's fucked. But Europe is also screwed. Europe, if Europe has to develop, and they're investing more in their own military and this and the other, because the United States eventually is going to pull out, either for domestic political reasons, a la Trump. I mean, you can kind of think of what the U.S. is likely to do as what Trajan did with the Roman Empire. And I don't normally like Roman-U.S. comparisons, but there is a real sense that Biden's pulling out of Afghanistan is kind of like the Hadrian-Trajan wall. We're done. We don't need this. We don't need it for security. We're going to accept a multipolar world. We're going to try to force it on our terms, but we're going to accept a multipolar world. Have a nice day. Europe. And you already saw this in Trump's rhetoric. But I want people to understand, Obama did some of this too. All right. Obama was also talking about NATO members paying more of the NATO cost. All right. This was not just a Trump thing. Trump made it explicit and broad and said it out loud and said it loud. Obama was very quiet, very diplomatic, but they did similar things. It's a matter of scale, not type. The empire is going to fall back. It's going to be investing into its regional hegemonic status. It's going to probably start pushing back on Canada a little bit more. It's going to try to integrate even more with Mexico.
Integrate in what way?
Well, NAFTA already pretty much integrated the economies, but there's going to be more concern about, say, what AMLO does. This, that, and the other.
Which is, I mean, like, do you think, like increase or like kind of like a return to a kind of like a yesteryear with the amount of like incursions into like South or like Latin America and stuff like that?
Directly, no, because of the military contracting issue we're talking about, but indirectly and through backdoor channels, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like too. It's like, I would say like Colombia, like they're kind of like utilizing those like military ties to really like hang on to like the last ditch effort, and like, yeah, I don't know if that looks like.
So let's talk about multipolar world thesis, because people associate with Alexander Dugin because he revitalized it in Russia, but it comes from English geopolitical strategy from the end of the English Empire. And it really was what they were using to describing the conditions of Europe and the capitalist world from, say, 1870 to 1914. So what it means is supply lines are secured by regional hegemons. All right. Trade is secured by regional hegemons. Now, what I want to point people out, since the Belt and Road Initiative doesn't look like it's going to be completed in the way anyone wanted, eventually those tensions between India and China, and then maybe even China and Russia, depending on how things play out over the long term, are going to increase. Why? Because you have a cluster of 3 regional hegemons right by each other, and they literally share borders. Like, and they don't have similar interest. And except for Russia, they all get hit super fucking hard by climate change. Russia's the only party that benefits from climate change. But Russia, while it's a huge physical country, unfortunately, the 20th century has thinned out its population quite a bit. All right. Between World War II and decommunization, 40% of all Russian males died twice in the last century, in a very short period of time. Twice.
Jesus.
All right. Why is it in Asia, for example, that the word for white prostitute is Russian? It's not just racism. It's because people were desperate and going anywhere. Right. People being vulnerable women at the end of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the modern Russian state. Like, there's a reason why the Russians are pissed. All right. They lost their adult 40% of their adult male population twice in 1 century. That's the kind of trauma that it's hard for any Westerner to even comprehend. So, people who think I'm anti-Russian are wrong. I don't like the Putin government. I don't think it's a left-wing government. I think I actually trust what Putin says himself. But, there's a reason why it is, and that's also a reason why it's kind of sui generis politically. You can't talk about it in the same terms. The trauma of the fall of this of the Soviet Union, particularly after the sacrifices that made it in World War II, is hard to comprehend.
I'm reading about that now in the book that Adam Curtis used as kind of the basis of hypernormalization.
Right. I don't think we should ever belittle that or not look at that. All right. But that's also why Russian politics, you just don't follow the political patterns of the rest of the world. All right. So there's those issues. NATO is interesting because you have NATO's been strengthened by this Ukraine thing in the sense that it's unified all of Europe into all of Europe that's part of not the Eurozone, the European Union, and a couple other periphery countries into NATO, and ones that were held out because they rightly didn't trust the United States for a long time. But it also is at a time where I believe the U.S. is going to start inching that back because it just has to. All right. We don't have the political will or the infrastructure. We can't outsource it anymore. We cannibalized ourselves too much, and we have cannibalized ourselves. That's the thing. Like, the irony of the U.S. empire is like the standard of living of the average British person during the empire from like the 1800s into the early 20th century. It actually did help the average British person. All right. The standard of living of the average American person was helped by U.S. Imperial projects from 1945 to 1962. That's pretty much it. Like I guess we get some things cheaper on the consumer level because of imperial ambitions. So you can talk about that. But the real benefits, the post-war social compact, that wealth, when the U.S. by just being the sole major power that wasn't bombed to shit during World War II, right? And also having imperial holdings, was able to go, well, we have 49% of the entire world's wealth in our borders, and we squandered it in in a little under a generation. All right, that I think people haven't that's why we've been in Malaise since the 70s. None of this is new. The empire has been fading. Most of our listeners, including most of us here, Pascal, I think you're literally the only person who is old enough to been born when this was not true, has been during the real declining phase of empire. And the up phase of empire was really only between, like, say, 1910 to 1955.
So are you saying that culturally, we're in a state of hyper normalization as well.
Yes,
where the
I
decline of empire is just so real and so normal that we've all just internalized it, and we're just going to keep playing pretend, like Russia before the fall. Or do you think it's a little different compared to Russia before the fall?
I hate to sound like since he became a reactionary, I haven't even gone into all the fine grained statistics of what we're seeing right now, but the last 20 years have normalized us to this decline.
I think the F-35 is going to be paying dividends here pretty soon. That the turnaround, they just got a few things to fix.
If we really look at if we look at what we've really engaged in as a country in the last 20 years, it's not an accident that we have been rectified to accept this decline. We're talking about post 9/11. I will make the argument it all falls apart with 9/11.
Yeah,
I would make the argument it all falls apart with the new millennium. But with 9/11,
it's so you don't understand. Did I send you the script? That's literally how the script. Because I'm pregnant. There's two parts to it because it's too long right now. That's literally how the first part ends with 9/11. There is the world before 9/11 and after 9/11.
I completely agree. It's interesting. But I think in 9/11's when the political malaise really hits, you see a strengthening of the state. A strengthening of the state, by the way, you didn't even see during the Cold War when the existential threat to capitalist powers was actually much, much higher. And that's the funny thing about the Patriot Act. And on this, I'm going to sound like a right winger. It really was for internal control. It totally was for internal control.
How does it sound like a right winger?
Yeah. Do you think part of that's like kind of like technology, because like during Cold War, Red Scare, that type of stuff, like they're counting on people informing on other people, or just like taking like words out of context, stuff like that. But like, I mean, with the Patriot Act, it's like, oh, we don't need snitches anymore. We can go directly to the source. Like, I don't know. Do you feel like that plays anything, or just like
I think a lot of it does? I mean, I think about like what you give, the data you give people by having a cell phone, just by having one, that the Stasi or the CIA would have killed for in the 1950s. Holy shit! I mean, like, it's just not. You don't need the security apparatus anymore.
It's so funny. The fact that when anything happens in this country, anything. You can see a car accident. What's the first thing people do? They take their phone out. A fight. I'm taking my phone out. You don't even need like
CCTV. See ya.
Yeah, you go to the UK. There's cameras everywhere. I remember we were recording in the studio in Bath, in Mole's studio in Bath, and the cops came in. They were like, "Oh, we need to get the footage from your camera that's on your building because someone got stabbed at the club across the street." And I was like, "Oh wow, that's crazy." But now. That was in 2013. If that happened in the States, some asshole would have posted it on fucking YouTube or Instagram. It would have been a TikTok.
Snitching on themselves all the time.
How many rappers are getting killed because they're like, look, I got all this money, and they're getting their ass kicked on their own fucking TikTok.
Most of the January 6 people are like the evidence. Number one is the selfie of them.
This is the again. There's the world before 9/11.
I mean, yeah, it's funny because how unself-aware people are about this, but it's also like it's also been normalized. Like Gen Zers they don't care about privacy because they don't assume it's possible. And look, I'm not a big privacy.
They do and they don't,
myself.
though, Derek, right?
Yeah, I mean it's complicated because they're also like
about it.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of social decline stuff I think that we have to look at, but internationally speaking, the entire this entire Tom Friedman argument, this Steven Pinker argument about the better angels of our nature and how everything's about to get better, it's about to get bad. But what I've been trying to get people to understand, it's about to get bad for everybody. It is not just bad for the United States. And the left, and we haven't talked a lot about the left because, shitting on the left is really easy. This is one thing where I actually agree with Besner. The left hasn't had any real political power for so long that it
What
looks
about
to the
AOC? No, I thought you let us. Look, Varn, I don't appreciate that, first of all, because I donated $25 to AOC in 2018, right? That $25 guaranteed me Black liberation, reparations, a new train station,
Black
healthcare,
liberation, reparation, constipation,
disassociation, and psychic disintegration. All right.
Like look, you and Besner can go fuck yourselves, because last I checked, I have a shirt that says "We are the squad." That shirt means that we have more political power in the halls of Congress than we've had in the last since Congress.
Back in biscuits.
Forced to vote.
I like to talk about the political trajectory of Gene Kwan, Nancy Pelosi, and a few other people when people bring this up.
You really want to go there?
Heck yeah, I'm in.
Nancy Pelosi, anti-Reagan Nancy Pelosi. Let's hear it.
Nancy Pelosi, as an Italian American from California, was seen in the 80s and late 70s as basically a AOC-like figure. And AOC has even brought this up in her defenses of the fact that they couldn't vote against her because all the other candidates were actually more right-wing than her. And you know what? AOC wasn't even wrong about that.
Yep.
The Gene Kwan. I really like to bring up Gene Kwan. The
props to you for bringing up Gene Kwan. First of all, you love California. Quit being a douche, man.
The neoliberal mayor of Oakland was a member in the late 60s of not just of a Maoist faction, but of the most extreme wing of a Maoist faction. These people have been recuperated before, and I want people to do some basic game theory as to why. Let's assume, in the case of AOC, that she really was AOC from the block and not just a Ted Kennedy staffer. All right?
Thank you.
But let's assume for real, though. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt here. She gets into Congress. And in her first year, she actually does some of the shit she says she's going to do. All right. Then very quickly she gets chastised and cut out. Now I've asked people in the DSA, in fact, David Griscom and I really get along with him when we're talking about regional politics and the way people treat Southerners and the assumptions, and the misunderstandings of U.S. internal politics. We mostly agree. And when we talk about this, David gets a little bit uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. All right. When I say you have no mechanism and no means of having a mechanism to protect AOC from the DNC, the DLC, the Democratic voter base, and all that. So even assuming that she was a good actor, what kind of compromises is she going to have to make to not get primaried out? Just assume that. And the same goes for all the squad. Cori Bush, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. And Ilhan Omar and
are facing serious primaries from their Democratic Party.
Bingo. And we all know from the way they treated South Texas that despite what they say about Roe v. Wade, despite all the national level Democratic politics stuff, that they'll support a right-wing Democrat over a left-wing Democrat.
You're speaking of Henry Cuellar.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. A good old Cuellar. Just because, and I want people to understand this. This is not just because they're evil and corrupt. It's also simple game theory. Since there's no alternative left organizations that really matter, they're all dependent on the Democrats since the Popular Front going all the way back to 1936. Any alternative to them is sectarian and not particularly useful in the United States. What other organization, other path can they go other than to make themselves politically irrelevant? Whereas a right-winger can change, and has done this historically. The reason why all the state houses in the South in 2000 went from Dixiecrat to Republican wasn't because they changed the representatives. It's because the representatives all changed the D to an R at the end of their name. That is very simple game theory.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page here, because there's some podcasts that came across my feed of things I should watch that told me something very different, Derek. There was a group of young people, young colored people, that told me that it was Tom Hartman, Noam Chomsky, and Sam Cedar, and the DSA.
Correct. Yep.
The white leftists, they told me, that is an impediment to building true political power. And you're telling me that there is no left?
The political left has been liquidated since, actually in the U.S., since Truman.
So Tom Hartman has nothing to do with stopping us from
all this is a distraction. All this is a parasocial distraction. I want people to really get that. It's a parasocial distraction. All these little sectarian groups. And look, I come out of a sectarian group. I get it. It's actually somewhat useful for getting a Marxist education as long as you don't let it brainwash you. Okay? But they're useless. And they know it, which is why they focus on subcultural stuff and media likes and this, that, and the other. But it also leads to weird situations. I'm going to say something that's probably going to shock some people. I'm not a fan of Jimmy Dore, and I'm not saying this as a caveat. I think his politics are fucked up. But
now we're never going to get on that show. Thanks a lot.
I can't be here. I can't be here. I need to protect my.
You'll never be president, Varn. You'll never be president.
All right, I don't want to be president. But let's be honest about this though, and this is going to offend the other side. If I was listening to the Majority Report and I was listening to Jimmy Dore, who's more accurate in predicting what the Democrats are going to do?
You'll have to answer that one. I don't know.
Dore.
Yeah.
Dore is now what Dore offers as an alternative is bullshit, right? And I don't say this to like piss on Sam Cedar. I think Sam Cedar's fine. The problem that you have, if you adopt a popular front strategy with a fading bourgeois party that can't even manage the capitalist state competently, is you're stuck trying to make excuses for them to maintain your coalition.
Dore has been saying the same thing that Black Agenda Report has been saying for 15 years. The Democratic Party is a party of its corporate donors, and they will stab you in the back to fulfill the needs of those corporate donors, and they have no loyalty to working class people.
Is it stabbing you in the back though when you know it's coming at that point?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you don't need to. I mean, at this point,
you don't need to go that
rocket science to realize that.
No, it's not. But this is my point, though. A lot of people are. I'm already seeing the chat getting mad at me. I'm not saying that Dore is right. I think Dore is using that to pour people into to move people into a very dangerous politics.
Yes.
All right. What I'm saying, however, is the logic of the Popular Front, which almost all progressives are the children of, and it's in their natural habitat and instincts in a way they don't even realize. No one thinks they're in a Popular Front anymore. They think they're doing anti-fascist action or this, that, and the other, right? And the problem is, and this is an incentive structure that's screwed up, but this is a media incentive structure. If you start criticizing the Democratic Party sincerely and you want money, who's going to give it to you? But Dam's
going to give it to you.
And notice what I also said, what they were right about. If you start looking at, like, if you want to listen to, like, who's right about Alex Jones and Glenn Greenwald?
Yeah.
Sam Cedar is. Who's right about the way that James Lindsay and David Rubin were going to go? Sam Cedar is. Absolutely. But notice what we're talking about there. We're talking about enemies of a progressive coalition. And they're calling it. What I tell people is don't just listen to people who reaffirm your current political position because they're flattering you. And in a decaying infrastructure and society, flattery is both appealing because it ameliorates the kind of normalization that you're experiencing in this broader economic context, right? It makes you feel like there's hope. But it also, frankly, removes your ability to actually enact and do the change that would make that hope possible. And it's not because Sam Cedar is a bad actor. That's not the point. He absolutely isn't. If you think Sam Cedar is ruining the left, you're a fool. This is not about individual actors. This is not about your individual consumption choices.
Mm-hmm.
When I say, like, when I say that Jimmy Dore is more accurate about what the Democrats in specific are going to do, he is. But he's carrying water for another team. All right? They've just taken the logic of the Popular Front, and instead of, trying to build something independent, they're picking out random parts of different things that look independent, the People's Party, patriotic socialism, some other such nonsense, but actually end up tailing the right.
Well, this is something that, I did some writing about, and Gene's going to republish one of these articles in Sublation soon. So hint. The idea that someone that says what you don't like is a grifter, and kind of ignoring the fact that some people can just be stupid, some people can be wrong, some people can have an ideology that you just don't agree with. But the idea, look, I'm going to say something, and I know it's going to get the whole chat buzzing, and fuck it, but I'm not putting it in the video essay. But force the vote, in my opinion, was the epitome of kayfabe. You do need people that legitimately believe something for that shit to play out, and people to fall in line and pick sides. It doesn't even matter what the context was in that. It was the hype over the idea that got people so fired up and emotionally involved. And the way this works, and the way we look at news, even modern news media, especially post 9/11, is an emotional involvement to side picking, a good versus evil binary that is baked into all storytelling. So you're trying to find a good guy, and that's the side you're going to go on. And recently, someone that we know made a comment about the horrors of force to vote. And it was horrifying to a degree, because everyone kind of lost sight of what any of this shit was really about. Right?
Yeah. So, one of the things I will say, I actually do think that Dore is a grifter. And I can tell you my status on that is the way he played and was mealy-mouthed around controversies in COVID. It seemed to be very much like he moved from a critique of Democratic Party failures to flirting with but not endorsing, just asking the questions kind of narrative around like anti-vax conspiracism and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So when people hear me, I'm just seeing the way people are responding, and it's not even a majority of your audience, but a lot of people really are kayfabed that they believe these media choices really matter. And a lot of the Jimmy Dore types are gone now because they just frankly moving right? They've just become right wingers. So let's be honest. We've also seen this with the Glenn Greenwald types, which if you knew Glenn Greenwald's long-term history, which I do, you would not have been surprised.
Exactly.
But my point is, if you only listen to people who flatter your political instincts and then tell people who push against you that you are ruining the left, I've literally seen this 3 times. Grow the fuck up. And I actually, in my audience, and I don't want to do this to your audience because
they deserve it, Varn.
Actually, your audience is somewhat better than mine. That's funny. It's not the point. Like Sam has done good things for leftists.
Yes.
All right. He's done great things for leftists. That's not my point. My point is that he necessarily, because there is no political alternative built, has to defend the Democratic Party. And that makes him be in a situation where many times on those issues, he ends up carrying water for stuff he doesn't really want to carry water for and wearing egg on his face against people like Jimmy Dore. That is not to say that he's not a leftist, that he's ruining the left. And this is not me backtracking either before people think this. I've thought about this a long time. Your parasocial relationships do not make a politics, and they definitely do not make political power. Right? A lot of these sectarian groups that I was just disparaging have been right about some key things. That doesn't mean they're not weird sectarian groups.
But that was like the magic of that whole thing. There was no political power trying to be built around an idea of forcing any sort of
It was
vote.
Yeah.
It was the idea was like, look, you're energized by it. And we forget that everybody that does this, you look at your numbers, whether or not you start making your programming built around those numbers, that's all you. We definitely don't, because that's why we're so small. But a lot of people were looking at the numbers and they jumped on because it was popular. Right. And that's the world we live in right now. It's all about drama and gossip. We talked about this with music.
It's also a lot of guru speak, and I already see it in the chat. For example, gurus like to speak in vague forms, so that when you point out what they are aligning themselves with, someone can go, "You're smearing them." I'm literally seeing this right now because they didn't say that. Well, you're right, they didn't say that. They just entertain the idea as a question and then backtrack later. I literally watched a series of debates between someone pointing out all the specific instances where Jimmy Dore said something about COVID, and then watching his response to it, saying it's a smear, and going, this is relying on him platforming something, but then just going the ask the questions thing, which is not that different than what you see grifters like Alex Jones do. It's a matter of kind and type and sophistication. All right. Now, has Jimmy Dore actually said anything explicitly anti-vax? No. Has he, however, had people very politically close to anti-vaxxers on his show and push their narrative? Absolutely. Which tells you something in and of itself. I really want people to develop more critical skills about how they approach this shit as individuals, as a kind of self-defense. Because as things get worse in the global economic situation, this is going to become more common, and it's not even out of grifting or malice in certain cases. Like if you were to ask me who's more on my side, I will tell you Sam Cedar any day. But if you want to ask me like who should you listen to on the Democrats, well, dissing the Democrats is easy, but it's also accurate. All right. And do you carry water for them at the end of the day is the question. Because right now, and I want people to listen to this very, very intently and get it through their skulls. All right. Right now, even average normie liberals are getting so frustrated with all parts of the Democratic Party, including the squad, that they will do nothing when a right wing takes stuff back this fall. And that is almost inevitable at this point. There's almost nothing the Democrats can do to reverse it, not even the stunt they pulled with Roe v. Wade, because that Roe v. Wade stunt made them look weak.
Well, the Roe v. Wade stuff, do you think it kind of called out the fact that for 50 years, no, let's say 40 years or so, there was a bipartisan consensus that Roe v. Wade was sacrosanct? I mean, even the Republicans back there, hardcore conservatives, didn't really touch Roe v. Wade.
Well, that's like the thing, though, is like there is just a more resourced but a more developed movement on the right.
Besner talked about that. We've been talking about this for a while now.
Yeah. Like
The
it's so
50 plus year counter revolution that Pascal talks about is not a joke. It's not just a saying. It's the idea that incremental change is going to happen. We're going to have literal institutions to train people like lawyers and judges in our ideology. When Besner said something along the lines of Stalinism worked for the right, or Marxist-Leninism worked for the right when it came to the 50 plus year counter-revolution, again, look at things like Roe v. Wade, look at voter suppression, look at who's in the courts right now, not just Supreme Courts, but all the other circuit courts. And
like,
there was no left for so long. And
That's
when
it.
we
No.
conflated the Democratic Party in the 80s and 90s, especially in the 90s, with liberals, fuck what you say about liberals at this point, but when we conflated those two terms, that was a problem. Because Clinton comes in, does the work of a right-wing administration with fanfare. 94 crime bill, welfare reform,
NAFTA, GATT.
all that happens in those 8 years. Huge banking deregulation. The wall that I got to see every time I go to TJ, that starts during this term.
Yeah, I think this is where we should really like focus in on a few things in a very key way. And it's funny because, you know, I'm talking about the international collapse of the global system and everyone's just like being quiet. And I mentioned they're parasocial fanboys and all sides just flare up and start
The
fighting.
views go.
And it's just, it's like, you're not here for the important stuff, which means you're also not going to be here when the important stuff goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And if that offends you, change your life.
My whole position in the parasocial stuff is that, like, yo, man, none of us, us included, is that fucking important. All right, we're all carnival barkers.
Exactly.
You Negroes speak for yourself. I piss excellence.
Anyway,
I mean, like, look, what I view myself as is a weird hobby educator who, for his own purposes, really does a ton of political development. And then, but it's really, frankly, I started doing this for me. And for the first 7 years of my life, it was at a net loss. I mean, 7 years of my life doing this. I didn't start this till I'm in my 30s. This was at a net loss. And then for the last 4 years, it's moved from self-sustainable to slightly profitable. All right. But not on a scale where I could quit my gay job. And if I did, let's be honest, the incentives that I'm complaining about would immediately apply to me unless I did a whole lot of other stuff to offset that, which is, you know, color, cultural commentary, whatever. This is what you either have to start following one of these two rabbit trails, or you have to offer a third thing. All right. And I'm not saying, that people being parasocially attached is even their fault. All right. The social alienation, all the larger conditions we've been describing for the 2 hours until we got off this sidetrack, are why we need this stuff emotionally, and why people are going to have a hard time breaking themselves out of this idea that you need to trust a person and not facts when it comes to how you develop your political economy. We're not even talking about trusting organizations anymore. We're literally talking about trusting your public perception of individual people. All right. Now that's common in periods of social breakdown and normalization. We're all carnival barkers because we're trying to deal with the fact that we all kind of know that the social supports that we had even in the 90s are going away. Let's look at how we all became podcasters. I moved abroad and became socially alienated from moving abroad for 8 years. Jason couldn't do music anymore. I don't know how you got into it, Pascal.
I
really
tried
don't.
to get into this for a while.
I'm a
Marcus,
shit poster.
yeah, MS is a shit poster. Marcus is building a post-military life. Like, I say this just to personalize it, but also to point out that we are also subject to and part of these conditions. But you can be aware of it or not. You can't opt out of it, but you can be aware of it or not, and you can inform your politics in an informed way or an uninformed way. If you're asking me who I'm going to defend at the end of the day, I'm going to defend Marxists and people who are criticizing the empire, and that's going to actually move me on what topic, on specific things, on what side I'm going to say is right on any given thing. Like I said,
that I agree with. And I mean, one of the things that has been a blessing for me in terms of my development in this politics is that I got my political education from people who came from a tradition. How much I agree with that tradition is irrelevant, but they came out of a Black radical revolutionary nationalist tradition, and they were rooted in a certain politics. And I learned from that politics, and I learned a certain level of an analysis, and a kind of analysis that was valuable for me. I may have disagreements with some of the aspects of that politics now, but still it was a good foundation. And I will never forget what I got from that. But what I'm seeing is that everyone on the left today doesn't realize that none of us were here during 9/11.
Yep.
Okay?
No.
None of us were here.
I was a right winger during 9/11. Not gonna lie.
There was no that's why it's hard for me to take this quote unquote, and we're talking about the left. Everyone is here because of Occupy to Bernie, man.
Bernie.
Give me a break.
I always say
particularly Bernie.
Bernie.
I don't understand why and frankly, the people who were here before are a little weird anyway, because they're so stuck in their own sectarian ideology that they can become a pain in the ass anyway. And I'm talking about a lot of
Thank you. I had a great conversation once. Me and Josh Con Russell were on a hike back when I was in Oakland. We had a great conversation about Occupy, and he was there. He was like, I don't know what people were talking about. He's like, it wasn't the left you think it was.
I think when we give, like, one thing I do want to push a little bit back. Bernie is why, because Bernie is a manifestation of these prior things. But Bernie is not the cause of these prior things. And sometimes
I think that Bernie created some legitimate energy himself around a phenomenon that created political actors. Listen, the parasocial actors that you're talking about, them, 3/4 of them come out of the Bernie Sanders phenomenon.
Right. Although Sam Cedar comes out of Air America Radio, like
that's a good point.
They're the old guys, or the old guys, right? They were more talking about the newer guard and the new burgeoning left. Even these older people that feel comfortable saying the word socialist, motherfuckers weren't saying it. People were like, I came out of Occupy. That's a great story. I love it. I didn't come out of Occupy. I came out of the Bay Area. But my point is, no one was saying socialist so freely. The hammer and sickle was not everywhere until we started talking about
we were real cagey about like when I was a Marxist in the late aughts. We were very cagey about how we presented it to the public. There was nobody.
Yeah, talk to Ben. I mean, Ben for years. Talk to Ben. Ben has been saying he's a Marxist socialist for some time, and that was something that people kind of didn't really want to talk about out loud, unless maybe you were in the hollowed halls of academia with
when
your
he was
Marxist.
in the hollow house of academia and he was in the ISO. So
right, with your Marxist friends, but that's not really something that people were proud to be about.
Right.
So.
And let's also be like, Sam Cedar has moved significantly left since.
I agree with that.
Since his days of working with Mark Maron.
The fact that Cedar has had me on his show a couple of times demonstrates how far his left he's got. I mean, he's had people who've been overtly critical of the Democratic Party for a while. I mean, listen, My my thing I have with people who have this hate for Sam Cedar is that when has he been dishonest about what his politics are?
He's never has.
He's never has been. The guy tells you where he is. He's not trying to act like some kind of hammer and sickle carrying leftist. That's not his politics. We had him on his show. He tells you all the time where he comes out of. He basically is a lib who basically agrees with some social democracy. That's it.
But think about the people that he comes out of with and how far to the left they were in the early 2000s. Rachel Maddow was a producer.
Rachel Maddow was considered a leftist. She was
on with Chuck D. Whatever you think about Chuck D. Well, Janine Garofalo is pretty quiet at this point because of all the hate she got. Who else? Who else was out of that same? Mark Maron. Would you call Mark Maron?
Yeah, Mark Maron. Mark Maron co-hosted a show with Sam Cedar back in the day.
Yeah, Mark Maron was like the big name from Air America for a while.
And let's like TYT and Air America were the only left ventures of any. Now I started listening to the Black Agenda Report podcast and reading them in around 2010, like right up before Occupy happened, because I was looking for other sources of news because
you're black.
Sure.
To get that in.
I have never claimed, unlike some persons that I supposedly look like, that I was black. So I think there's a whole lot of people have rewritten a lot of their political histories. The thing is with me that, like, you can trace me back to 2000 to before Occupy. Occupy for me was a breaking point, not my radicalization came in 2007, 2008, and the failure of the Obama campaign and having nowhere to go. And have literally nowhere to go. Like, I have been a Gravel supporter, that I threw my support beside Obama because there was nothing else. And then I was like, and he appointed his cabinet. And because I grew up in the 90s and remember Clinton, I'm like, that motherfucker. And I use that language in my head. Okay. My friends were all celebrating his victory. They were literally having parties in the street in 2008. And I just looked at his cabinet and I felt my stomach drop.
3/4 of the people that we're talking about who are on the left right now were celebrating Obama's victory.
They totally were. And one of the things I'm honest about, I campaigned for Obama in 2008. The only Democratic president I ever campaigned for.
Thank you for saying that.
But I campaigned for him.
But thank you for saying that, because there was a lot of hope. I said this in front of Margaret Kimberly at the New York show. Anyone that was at the New York launch party, I looked at everyone in the crowd and I said something about Obama, and I was like, before you guys start booing and hissing, if you were old enough to vote, very few of you were really anti-Obama. And I pointed at Margaret because Margaret was there. I said, Margaret and
what?
her crew from Black Agenda Report were some of the few people that were talking about Obama, because there was the idea of hope and change. And we can't lie about the fact that a lot of people wanted to get past racial bullshit. And they felt like this election of Barack Obama was going to get us past the racial strife of America. Rodney King is gone now. We have a black president. Black excellence is going to be a thing. We're going to get out of this financial crisis. We have to also remember that everyone lost everything.
Yeah.
Black people lost everything during Obama.
Yeah. It was what I think people, what I had was just cognitive dissonance. Actually, I was living in the Deep South at the time, and I was in a mostly black community, and people were like dying on the hill for Obama, and I'm like, but you're all getting poorer. Like,
and someone said, let me interrupt you guys real quick. Someone said Cornel West didn't agree with Obama. That is not true. He didn't agree with Obama.
Initially, he campaigned for him.
He campaigned for Obama. Please stop with the everybody knew about Obama shit. None of y'all motherfuckers read Adolph Reed.
I got hip to the Obama reality by Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon after Obama's election early on. But initially, I supported him. And I told people all the time I supported him because everyone who knows me knows I despise the Clintons more. And in the
Mhm.
primary, when he was challenging Hillary, I was like, I hope he beats the bricks out of that woman because I hate the Clintons. I've
She
always
ran a
hated them.
racist campaign too, so that
Yeah,
made
it
Yeah,
it.
wasn't
I,
Glenn
I
Ford
didn't
that
even have
called out
to.
Obama. It was Adolf Reed that called out Obama in the 90s.
Yeah,
It
Adolf
was-
called him out in '96 as basically the harbinger of the worst that was to come for black politics when he met the guy at a function in Chicago, and he literally was like, "No, this is not the answer," and he was right. But Bruce Dixon trained Obama as a community organizer in Chicago.
Yeah.
He went to the Obama's wedding and was like, "Oh hell no, no." They realized that this cat, what he what they recognized that this was neoliberalism being put on a blackface Trojan horse, being sold to America, and the consequences would be horrific, and the consequences were horrific.
Right.
And we have to
Oh,
remember,
wow.
let's put into context what he was replacing. Before 9/11, this is why we always go, there's the world before 9/11 and after 9/11. There was no stop the steal storming of the Capitol, but a lot of people believed that Bush Jr. was not the rightful president
Right.
because
And
the
then a lot of
election
people
was
did in 20. I mean, Glenn Greenwald and co. will try to like spin this,
Mhm.
but they're not wrong that the primary election conspiracy people from in 2004 in particular, where I think the evidence is much less, were leftist and were liberals. And so my radicalization came to the fact I had this conservative anti-war movement, and I still had connections to that. I was getting out of that, and then I was looking for someone to explain Obama, and it was Cornel West for me. And watching Cornel West turn, being like, okay, somebody else sees this,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
that led me to Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon. That led me to who else? It led me to a lot of countercultural people. But I will also say what we saw was the right at that time was making forrows into that too. And so I was always trying to be like, I was always looking at this and like knowing that I came from the right and going like, what of this is a right wing thing and what of this is left wing, and that further pushed me down a Marxist path. I joined the I tried to join the SP. I actually didn't fully join because there was no local. The SPUSA, and then ended up in a certain platypus society for a little while, and then went on my own. But this was all between just the for me the immediate disillusionment with Obama. But I supported him too. Like I said, what got me was the cabinet appointees. When I saw the cabinet appointees, I was like, this is a Clinton power base fuck. It's the same people. He's not actually going to bring up anybody new and different in the Democratic Party. And I was just like, oh shit. Like, but until that point, I was like, well, I don't know much about him. He's more, I knew he was more moderate than he was being portrayed by either side. But I was like, you know what, for the symbolic reasons and just to get rid of this Bush shit. I mean, people have erased how bad
Totally erased it.
2000 to 2008 was.
Totally erased it because there's the world before 9/11. That's why, to me, the Sam Cedars of the world, the Tom Hartmans of the world are kind of important to have around because they kind of remind us of that context because they were there in that time. They were reporting on things during that time. We forget about how many people did not want to go to war and the 2004 election. Do you guys remember the 2004 election?
Of course.
Yeah, me too.
A lot of cats thought that Bush was done because so many people despised the war. Not thinking about the fact that kayfabe was being played after those towers fell.
I mean, and that was, I will admit, that was when I started getting onto the contradictions of the Democrats, not Obama, but how many of them became anti-war in 2006, who were pro-war in 2000, 2001, and feeling very like, I don't trust you about that. But Obama came up and was selectively, it was anti the Iraq War, but not the Afghanistan War. And I remember a lot of progressives actually being disillusioned by that. And I was going, but he said it. He didn't lie to you even. Like, he told you the truth. Like, on that, he lied about some other shit or deprioritized some other shit, but he told you the truth on that. Like, you projected that upon him. And that's when I started really thinking about projecting our politics onto these people, and including Bernie. Because one thing I will say, the Bernie phenomenon surprised me, but I was highly skeptical. All right, I'm not. We were talking about who called Sam Cedar. Mary Bookchin called Bernie in 1984. And what I think we have to say, Bernie was the perfect person because of his experience in the New Left, being a silent generation leftist, to understand the moment at the time that it was. Otherwise, he would have just been another Dinesh Kucinich or Mike Gravel.
Yes.
Right? That is what is different, and that is unique to him. But that's also the problem of Bernieism, is that it really didn't deal with the contradictions of the New Left, because they got so destroyed in the 80s and 90s by the Atari Democrats and the Republicans that they were frozen in time. They didn't develop. This is what, and you're absolutely right, Pascal. I remember going up to Occupy, you go to left events, and it was young people, and then it was like these 60-year-old dudes who were like elder boomers or silent gen people who were like frozen in 1968 or 1974 or 1976. And like, that's where the world stopped for them. And they've been fighting this fight. Like, I hate to use, like this, like they were the last soldier not told the war was over. And that they lost, and they were a great source of leadership and inspiration, but they also had their own neuroses and a failure to deal with the fact the world really had changed. And that, that's where a lot of my issue came in. And like the millennial left ended up in a lot of ways recapitulating the New Left, because that was the only people we had for any institutional memory, because we were destroyed all the way back in 1948. Yeah. Or even before then, actually. I mean, you I think the end of the U.S. left really is with the expulsion of Henry Wallace from, and the replacement of Henry Wallace with Truman as a political force, as a serious political force in the United States. And unfortunately, and this is why you hear me rail against this pop frontism, and this is where I do sort of want to point out the problems of the Sam Cedars. They're important. We shouldn't erase them, all right? But we should point out this pop frontism is in our DNA, because it was what got us the biggest successes in the U.S. in the 20th century in the 30s and 40s.
At the expense of the left.
Exactly. And it made us ripe for purging in the 50s. They used the very mechanisms that made it look like the New Deal was successful. The National Labor Relations Board, this and that and the other, to purge all the communists in the 50s. That's what they used to do it. It was the things that the communists had helped build in the 20s and 30s that the CPUSA had deliberately gone out and did were the things that were used to crush the CIO's communist wing in the 50s. And we've never recovered from that. Like, that's our history, and the world has moved on. I actually like talking about where the world is going, because that's what we need to adjust to. And as much as we're stuck in these weird sectarian debates and they're not even sectarian, these weird parasocial debates, we cannot look at that. We don't.
Well, before Toussaint reads the super chats, I do want to say this. Varn, you killed it today. This is for you, baby. Here it comes! Oh my God!
I love this, like, it end like on this like long, incredibly like nuanced,
Varn, there's a reason why you're my favorite alabaster leftist, except you're Sean King, so you're really not alabaster. But But no, man, you rocked out of the park. You know, Jason we started the show. He was like, "Oh, it's gonna be Pascal going in." I was like, "I'm not going in. I'm just listening, man. I want to take notes." You know, I was like, Varn's just like giving a colonic right now on the American, the political
Oh
economy.
my gosh! Wow,
what's going on in the United States?
live stream colonic.
Nigga, what?
All right, but
So
nah, man,
Tucson,
it was
I think
great. It
there's
was great having you on,
three.
Varn. And we're gonna be calling you regularly to come on every now and then to put some clarity into things. And Varn is one of the few people where I'm like, yo, he needs to be in more spaces because
Yes.
he brings it. And I like Varn because he's not an academic. He doesn't come out of academia, and he has that deep dish of knowledge about left political history, global geopolitics, economics, where he can bump heads with these academics and these people that come out of academia. We're like, no, you're full of shit. And I'll tell you why. And I appreciate that about him.
Yeah, you know where that comes from? I tried to be an academic and then I realized what it was and felt conned. Like I was a poor working class kid who was taught that being an academic was going to get me out of it. I got to university and realized that they were full of shit, and that it was soul crushing, Pascal, to realize that, because I had really believed in that meritocratic bullshit most of my life. I was like, this is going to get me out. This is how I'm going to get out, you know. And when I realized that it was a fucking lie, like my world collapsed. Like it really did. Like and then I went and became a public school teacher, and that was, you know, that was the best beginnings of political radicalization you could have, plus recession, you know, to look with the realities of the world, like, you know, and I think more people need to do that. You need people. You need people who come. The academics, some of them are great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like they serve an important function, but like I said, they tend to be too narrowly specialized, or they're kind of full of shit, and no one's been calling them to account for a long time, including each other. Like we talk about, like the academics would tell you like this vibrant academic discourse, and that may be true in the sciences, but in the humanities, it's mostly people blowing smoke up each other's asses.
Yeah, and it's hard. I think it's hard for certain people to comment on that because they do the same thing, right? They comment on shit they know nothing about. So how are you going to call out an academic for, you know, he's a specialist in literature, but he's talking about policy? It's like, well, your PhD doesn't mean you know what the fuck you're talking about here.
Yeah,
But Tucson, read some super chats.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have one super chat from Autumn Leaves for Jason's birthday. Also, can we get a wrestling drop, which we did do, because Varn did kill it.
There's a new wrestling drop coming for August that is going to be my new favorite.
For August. Okay.
Our next show is August.
Let's see. Oh, that's right. Okay, wow, that's really soon. All right, let's go with this one. Stephanie Welch says, can you guys talk about what it is to be on the left in U.S. politics now? I can hardly find any of my old leftist friends focused on economic issues or imperialism, and they trust the FBI and CIA now. So
are they really on the left?
This is a major question. A lot of people are not.
So I don't want to shut on anti-fascism. They do important work, but one of the sad, unfortunate things about the Trump deep state narrative is there is a deep state Virginia, and it's real, and it is the military-industrial complex. And while the opposition to that was from the right, unfortunately, that has led people to think that we should be supporting that state. And then there's also the fact that we haven't totally broke ourselves of these Atari Democrat habits of like, well, institutions are good, regulation is good, it's good in and of itself. Therefore, the things that enforce regulation are good. And this is what I point to people. Like, if you want regulation that affects everything, but you hate the cops, you really don't make it. Because regulation requires the cops. That's how it fucking works. I I think that's a lot of incoherence about this, and I think blaming individuals for this is kind of, they're not on the left, but it's really kind of getting them aware of that. It's going to be hard because it's not just because they're bad people or CIA stooges or whatever. It's because there hasn't been a left meaningfully to them be attached to in any political way, and the left that exists, that has become a kind of real left post Bernie, still has not been able to fully break itself from these same apparatuses. So it's very hard to do, and I think that's why there's a lot of facile anti-imperialism out there too. I mean, we gotta be honest about that. But it's why that seems like such a breath of fresh air to people, because they realize that they've been, even people who are supposedly on the left have been spewing anti-communist bullshit for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and not getting called out on it. And trusting government sources because that was the only source that they had and knew. All right. And so I think you do have to meet people where they are, but what you can't do is just validate, yeah, you don't need that. We can all do this with internal policy. Because the other thing that I've been really pushing on, it's been undercurrent to what I was saying earlier, is national politics is not going to be good enough for anything. It's not. Capitalism is a geopolitical totality. All right. To fight that, you have to fight it on multiple fronts, on multiple nations, coordinated. And the inability to fight that in a coordinated way is why, honestly, the USSR probably failed, and why Lenin was always torn up about the failure of the German Revolution and never really totally recovered from that, because it totally messed up their political strategy. It's why during the 20s and 30s, the USSR seemed incoherent, going back and forth, because it was desperate trying to figure out what else to do now that the German Revolution didn't happen. Well, we haven't left those conditions. We have to fight it internationally. And there's not really a state positioned to do that isn't also having to operate within that system. And so getting mad at people for that it's understandable. We can't validate this. And remember, I always say, don't let people flatter you, right? But we should be compassionate as to why they get there, because there hasn't been anything else. It's hard to find a Bruce Dixon. It's hard to find a Adolf Reed. They were not honestly, until 2009, 2010, they had largely been forgotten about. And it was because of the disillusionment people felt with Obama by 2010, I think, that they even went back onto the radar at all. And these people have been working for decades. I mean, Reed, and peace be upon Bruce and Glenn. They've been, they were fighting this fight alone for a long fucking time.
Long time, man.
From the 60s. And when Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon died, I was, even my pale ass was we just lost something major. And a lot of those old, these old weirdos I was talking about, I don't think Glenn and Bruce were weirdos, but you know all those old trots and Maoists who show up at the meetings. They're all dying now. We don't have that continuity of history. And when they're gone, there is a sense in which the people who, the Sam Cedars really are the intermediate step. And unfortunately they were disconnected from these new left radicals. They didn't seem viable to them because they were so thoroughly defeated by
come out of Gen X neoliberalism.
Right. And also let's be fair to Gen X neoliberalism. The Soviet Union fell. There's a reason. I mean, the reason why Gen X is so reactionary, and I can say this as a borderline Gen Xer, Pascal, and age is a material condition, but also they're responding to a world where the leftist states either look to have liberalized or to have been crushed. There did not look to be an alternative.
Mm-hmm. Leftism is completely alien to the consciousness of Gen Xers, man.
Yeah, it totally is. And
well,
so
I mean, also think about. I was writing about this recently. Leftism, if you really think about it, is kind of sorry. Leftism at that point is more so the counterculture, and the counterculture is just anti this big time conservative movement in the West with Reagan and Thatcherism.
Plus, don't forget, man, for Gen Xers, that's the generation that's coming out of school and they're like, we want to get paid. We want to get paid,
right.
Wall Street jobs.
And it's all that's been dwindling for them for some time, right? That's why you get the reactionary music like punk rock and to a degree hip hop.
Well, let's think about this. Like, Gen X was the first generation after the post-war social compact that could be promised that they weren't going to get what their parents had gotten and what their grandparents, even the silent generation, had gotten.
Right.
Like, and that we talk about that with millennials because millennials are a bigger generation, but it really hit Gen X. But unlike with millennials, like, they saw the formal worldwide left crushed in their lifetime.
Right.
I don't think people, like, when they talk about how reactionary Gen Xers, they're right, but it's not a failure of character. Again, like, it's the overall material conditions in which these people exist. All right. That might prompt a failure of character, but I highly, like, don't write people off as if, like, Gen X is bad, because that wasn't really what was going on. There's a reason, like Pascal's right. There's a reason why none of us were immediately attracted to leftism, because it just didn't seem viable. Like, even if we thought we were leftist, we were later on discover that we probably weren't.
That wasn't even a term you used. You were just liberal or you weren't.
Right.
Yeah.
You were liberal or conservative. Right. And we'd always go like, what's up? I mean, I remember, actually, this is funny. I remember teaching a class at a local community college, and we had this paper we were writing about the 60s, and I played Love Me, I'm a Liberal, and no one fucking understood it.
Great song. Yep.
I love that song.
Right, but like it literally like skips a generation in its comprehensibility. Like Gen Xers don't, and early millennials at first did not get it, because it's like, but liberals are leftist. What? I mean, I know the Europeans are weird and they don't talk that way, but they literally used to explain that as a cultural difference. Like, oh, the Europeans, say liberals are something different from the left, but we don't. That's just a weird cultural thing. It's like, no, it was buried history. It was the erasure of the left.
Exactly, man. This goes back to Lenin. This goes back to the early Marxist philosophy. This goes back to differentiating liberals from the left is a strong part of leftist praxis that we had lost in the West, in the United States.
People forget, that's why I always say a really good book, if what we're saying is kind of like, I don't get it, or I don't understand it, or I was too young. The End of History by the Alpha Bunga Bunga guys. And also, I think it's in the chat. Alex Aculi wrote a new piece in Sublation that actually talks about this time of anti-politics.
I read that piece.
That happened in the 80s and 90s.
I'm like mid millennial, but like that's like, you don't talk about politics and religion is like that was the tenor for any type of social interaction.
Yeah,
like,
it's funny though. There's a lot of people pushing back about the Bay left, and I think we need to talk a little bit about that. Like, there were in New York, Chicago, and in Northern California, there were these enclaves of subcultural lefts that did maintain a tradition. And so, like, I remember in 2010, I was going to visit my best friend who lived in Oakland. So people who know why I know California so well. Mm-hmm. And I walked into this little coffee shop, and there was Baba Vacuum books everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait, this is real? like there are still you mean the Bay Area really does still have like Marxist groups? But the other thing that I think people need to like be honest with themselves is those people were never viable. They had mostly, I mean, Bob had left the country. It had become a subculture.
Talk about your cults.
And and so they were maintaining a tradition. I actually think that's true. But it had been subculturalized because of the events of the 70s and 80s. I would say even people who were pro RCP, the Revolutionary Communist Party in the U.S. different from the. I really wish we were better at naming parties, but because these acronyms get confusing as fuck. But like they would even probably admit that they had been traced back down to a tiny rump of people because of the reactionary culture of the 80s and 90s. But the thing is, for most people who are not in these, let's be honest, also relatively rich, to be fair, not that everyone who lives in Berkeley is rich. There's plenty of poor people in Berkeley. But if you look at the aggregate income, it's rich. Enclaves that were totally disconnected from the rest of the world. And like when someone like me encountered that, it was both liberating but also weird. It was like, oh, I thought you guys were dead. Like I thought the move bombing had killed you all.
But
and
the identity struggle became definitely real, even in these enclaves, right? The identity struggle becomes the struggle that is talked about in these left circles. You know, when we think about how anti-politicized we were in the 90s and early 2000s, you know, again, back to a pop culture standpoint, you know, we joke about a group like Rage Against the Machine. They literally had Shining Path propaganda in their videos.
Yeah, they did.
People didn't know that they were like communists or socialists.
First time I read Angela Davis, I got her from a library from seeing her book on the back of, what is it, the second Rage album, when they just had a bunch of commie and anarchist. I mean, the thing is, though, like, Rage Against the Machine's politics weren't particularly coherent, but you could find stuff from them. And I think, you know, for like the deep, if I go into my deep history, I do have to admit that's part of it. Like, but it didn't stick. It didn't feel real. I mean, that felt subcultural. It's like, well, that's something you do. And honestly, for me, particularly in the aughts, going up to 9/11, I felt like that's something which white kids do.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like I had gone on a free Abul Jamal campaign in my teens and brought it to the black part of my neighborhood and got laughed at and called a silly white boy. And
because no one knew what it was.
Yeah,
no
some of them said he's probably guilty, and I was shocked, and I was like, well, maybe I don't understand. I'm just you know, I don't get it. I don't understand black culture, so you know, that was the way I wrote it off too.
Dude, I remember Mumia Shack. I don't know if Pascal remembers this, and I doubt Marcus does. He was a child, but I remember playing a free Mumia show in like '94 at the steps of the Capitol in Sacramento. Maybe 40 people were there. Most of them were old holdovers that you're talking about, Derek, from the 60s and 70s, and doing like spoken word shit. And we're all looking at like, what the fuck? Nobody gave a shit politically in the 90s and 2000s. And Occupy, I get it, for a lot of people, is kind of a bomb, but it's more of someone finally turned a light switch on for you. And I really believe that 2015 is when now you're starting to see the things in the room, that the lights are finally on, and people are getting more aware of the idea of public goods governance.
When we think about, like, I think about when I was involved in punk zine culture. Like, Jason and I talked about this, right? And, you know, as a poor white kid, my first trip outside of the Southeast was to Seattle. We saved up a bunch of money to go to this protest. And I accidentally kind of walked into the Battle for Seattle, which I'd heard about from zines. And I've talked about this a lot. I saw Pat Buchanan there. I saw a lot of people there. It was a big flashpoint, but it also, the day after, everyone said we won because there was some concessions made. And then a month later, it felt like we completely lost, and the alter globalization movement had not done anything. And for me, that, like I've told the story, that's when I started looking to the right, because there was nothing after that failed that felt like it could do anything. And at least the rightists, well, they hate it. And I'm not talking about Republicans, okay? But they seem to, it's the same appeal that like national conservatives have now. They seem to hate empire, They only hate parts of it, but they seem to hate empire, and they seem to like care about Americans. And usually it's got racial code words in it. But if you're not hip to that, and actually as a undereducated white working class person, you're probably not hip to the code words. The dog whistles don't hit to you till you're already indoctrinated. It seemed like the way to go, and it seemed like the counter systemic force at the time was on the right, which unfortunately, I want people to worry about this. I think that's going to happen again because of the way we are associated with the Democrats right now.
And also, I mean, like that, like there's like libertarian in like sex groups, like, or just like the Libertarian Party that's like covering down on that right now. That's like saying like, oh no, like fighting for some type of like liberation is within the like Libertarian Party's realm, when like it's just all types of fucky. Like their politics are either like reactionary as fuck if they're developed in any way. Other than that, it's just like people yelling about toaster regulations or some shit. But that seems like that is attractive to an alarmingly substantial amount of people.
I had a phone call from a young lady friend, comrade today, who was legitimately concerned, this graduate student, about how so much of the left is moving into a reactionary right-wing direction because of all of these online Twitter phenomena, like the patriotic socialists, all of this stuff. I was like, you must way more online than I am. She was like, no, this stuff is out there. People are buying into it. And I was like, are you serious? And she was like, it's really, really growing. And she was talking about all these individuals that are coming out of these spaces, talking about Duginism and whatnot. I was like, yo.
Read the comments from the show we did with Varn last year about third and fourth positionism, about how we didn't cover Dugin properly. It looked like, people talking about postmodernism or Jordan Peterson, like you didn't have an accurate portrayal of Duginism. Right. And I will say
even though, like, I'm going to say this, I have direct connections to the man, so fuck off. Like,
and I will say, you literally gave us some great reading material to get ready for that show. Shout out to you for getting us ready for that show, so no one can say like we don't know who the fuck Dugin is, or know what he's about.
But I think,
wait, hold on. Speaking of great reading material, we do have super chats. You can go ahead and finish that thought, and then we're gonna.
No. I was just one of the things I was gonna say, because I come out of the right, I'm very susceptible. I know what they do, and I know who their thinkers are, and I know their code talk. All right. And I have seen on the online discourse with people with, like, on Twitter, I have 4,000 followers or 3,900 followers or something. There are people with 50,000 followers throwing the shit around. How real are they? How many of their accounts are bots? Who the fuck knows? But it doesn't matter at a certain point.
All set. I did listen to what you said. I wasn't just waiting to speak. All right, so we have a super chat from Robert Booth. No message, but thank you. Angela Bailey says, fire show. We have Choking on Ashes 61. You'll never walk alone. P.S. Love you, MT. Thank you. Love you back, Chokey. Autumn Leaves. Pascal, did you enjoy Beyonce's new album?
She got some cuts.
It's not bad. It's like, yeah.
It's important.
If you got to choose, if you got to choose between the new Drake and the new Beyonce, listen to the new Beyonce twice. Don't even fucking waste your time with that.
She got some cuts.
It's not bad.
You guys are ridiculous.
We got to address the black community, okay? We got to address the black community.
It's an all-black show today. We have a...
Negro.
Negro.
See, the more you talk about this, the whiter I become because I turn red.
You started the Afro-pessimism fight between us and
Varn.
Greg. What's his name? Greg Tate. Greg Tate got so mad. Greg Tate got so mad. The motherfucker wrote an article in The Nation.
did.
He did.
That was the most. I just
article
remember
in the
sitting back
Nation.
and be like, I did not mean to break. I didn't know Afropessimism was going to come up when we were talking about music and Jewish cultural arts. I'm going to fade into the background. Like,
That's like this. Like Varn, are you really the Fed? You just in here just like dividing the left. You know?
Varn had the grenade. He was like, "Here, motherfucker, hold this."
Yeah, exactly.
you know,
Back out.
I'm always torn on this actually because we talk about, in one sense, I am really worried about this whole, particularly this rephrasing of right-wing ideas with like really tortured readings of left-wingers and really bizarre intellectually arcane ways in which they construct this. And on the other hand, though, I do sometimes worry about like for example, Dugin. Dugin is a marginal figure in Western politics. Like he's not a major figure, and that does need to be emphasized. And so when leftists are like, because I noticed in 2016 there was a very weird strain of that Russiagate conspiracist liberalism who started picking up on Dugin. And that's why I like stopped talking about it for a long time, because I was like, well, like those Russiagators are like making like this guy isn't really that important. Like the military is really what's important. So like, but I am worried now that it's also leading them to people taking domestically right-wing politics, like taking really kind of like resurrecting the 1940s opinions of the Soviet Union on gay and trans people against the early Soviet opinions on gay and trans people, or the late Soviet opinions on gay and trans people. Like they're finding like these little blips in history on the left where there is some kind of deviation that was right-wing, and like trying to incorporate it. And I think it's because conservatism is not popular amongst young people, but the material conditions are moving in a reactionary direction, and so they have to dress it up as something. But that's actually worse, because that like it would be better for us if they just outright became reactionaries, because now our ideas seem confused.
We
Hey,
have
Joanna
a
H is
few
in the
more
chat.
super chats. Yeah, she sent a super chat too.
What did
So she said, "Thanks for the show. Varn being annoyingly correct on most points as usual."
Why annoying? That seems rude.
I don't know,
Because of my
man.
style, I'm kind of a dick.
Because of the
People-
Sean King style. Which I do. I do, and then with that, it's like, have you wondered maybe the different glasses, you know, a different style, a different frame, you know, it might. It's still
better.
there. Sorry.
Doesn't make it better.
Yeah, sorry, I was just,
Does it help? Does it help?
just throwing it.
Varn, real quick, because people keep asking this question, real quick. What's the difference? Like, what is the problem with patriotic socialism?
How much time you got, buddy?
That's it, real quick.
Right.
Because I'm going to argue from effects, because even though it claims to be intellectually distinct from Boderism, which was the CPUSA's attempt at patriotic socialism, because the patriotic socialism encouraged by 50s era Mao or by the USSR was in context against the developing world, and you're claiming to be patriotic within it. In the capitalist core, which makes no sense, which is also why Boderism makes no sense. It was ultimately rejected by the CPUSA because it was incoherent with their other policies. For people who don't know what Boderism is, you should look it up. It's I'm probably mispronouncing it, so a lot of stuff. That's BROWDERISM, and it was a specific period in the U.S. Communist Party's like post 40s. We're going to do this patriotic build up. We're going to reread American history through pink and red colored glasses thing that they did. The other thing is increasingly it incorporates explicitly anti-Marxist ideas. Dugin is anti-Marxist and explicitly says so in fourth position, in his fourth position book. He sees Marxism as the failed second ideology after liberalism, fascism as the failed third ideology, and fourth positionism or Eurasianism as what he hopes to be the successful fourth ideology. It sees itself as a successor in mock critique of fascism. I would say it is not fascist, strictly speaking, but it has definite overlaps. And its original targets in the United States were originally right-wingers. For example, a whole lot of people who used to be neo-Nazis and what is American third position became American revolt, American fourth positionism, and that was explicitly around riling behind Alexander Dugin. Alexander Dugin's translators also had connections to people like Richard Spencer. Do not fool yourselves. All right. Patriotic socialism, however, takes that and these multipolarity arguments and tries to come up with a, an ideology around that. Some of the people in it do have direct connections to other to other people that we've talked about, and I can even name who they have connections through and how they got paid. And I know this because when I was coming out of the right onto the left, they approached me too. All right. So there's that, but I think there's also bigger concerns. Patriotic socialism sounds like it can make friends with, say, national conservatism, which is this nationalist conservative post-Trump thing, and they are also making inroads with leftists, and frankly, with far more bigger and more important leftists. A lot of the post-Bernie people have gone over in that direction, and a kind of
Yep.
To national conservatism?
Yes. The national conservative people are tied into the same people who do Compact Magazine. Writing for Compact Magazine does not make you a national conservative. Don't make those confusions. Don't be unnuanced. Don't do the guilt by association game. But there is, like, if you looked at the national conservative conferences, some of the Marxists who write for that also spoke there. All right.
This wasn't.
Can I ask you, because on this, and like you're speaking to a lot of the like leadership, the people who are driving these narratives and stuff like that, and like I guess like part of the issue too is that there are people who don't have an understanding of like where this all comes from, and they're kind of just like buying into these ideas of like, well, this didn't work out, so we just got to try this, and they're really not thinking it through.
Right.
And so I've often wondered of like, you can do like ties to like certain narratives and like communal narratives. Like if you're in fucking Pittsburgh and your organization can't tie into the steel workers, like you're going to be missing a big chunk of like the cultural narratives within that community and shit, and like, that's what I feel like people could tie into, but like they end up attaching to this Pat talk bullshit and all that comes with it.
I think about a letter that Engels wrote representing Marx's opinion to August Bebel. Okay, now this is some obscure shit, but Engels says you don't try to win the leadership, you try to win the base, and you try to understand the base, because the leadership is forgone, and if they're gonna come over to your side, they're gonna do it because the base did. So you might have turncoats who turn back to your side because of purely opportunistic reasons. You don't necessarily you don't trust them, but you don't necessarily reject them, but you don't go after them. What people do is they go, well, these people talk to the working class. I don't know the different working class. I only know my community. I realize that that's limiting, but these people say they talk to Pittsburgh steel workers, and I don't know, Trump run an election there or whatever. So, not in Pittsburgh, but in Wisconsin. But, so I'll listen to them, right? That's still wrong-headed. It's going to the wrong source, and it leads you to be easily manipulated and abused. I think that's a lot of what's driving a lot of this stuff. A lot of people are so disconnected from any community that this sounds good. Mm-hmm. And there is definitely that. There's also the fact, and people talk about trots. I'm going to actually say this. All major Marxist tendency in the U.S. have produced significant numbers of turncoats. David Horowitz was a Maoist. So I'm going to put that out. The Congress for Cultural Freedom, actually, which was an OSS front, was an anti-communist front, got a bunch of former Trots, former Social Democrats, and some former Stalinists, or Marxist-Leninists. I used to collect nomenclature to make them feel better. They got a bunch of different varieties of them to go do CIA work without telling them, but they all did it. Christopher Lasch actually called them out of this in the book in the 60s. Like, before, now we know. Like, we know it's been declassified. We know this happened. All right. So there's a long history of people desperate looking for any after their side seems defeated to moving to the right. First thinking that they were going to find a new access to the workers or a new way to revitalize the workers' movement. And then usually they get captured and actually become rightist. You know, I think about what Adolf Reed said about Angela Nagel all the time, that she got. That's what we're talking about. Like, a lot of people tend to approach this with the idea that somebody was bad in the beginning, that they were always like that. They were always secret this or secret that. That is rarely true. And I also hate to tell you, if we're materialists, we can't have this idea that like there's some secret corrupting thing in these various Marxist ideologies that are just going to like, they put this idea in and it takes something going wrong and then all of a sudden you're going to be a fascist, right? But there's also truth to the fact that the fascist leadership, not its base comes from a different class bound, but the fascist leadership in most periods in history are left-wing defectors. That's true in Italy. It's not as true in Germany, but it's literally the formation of the Italian fascists.
Yeah.
Mussolini is a left-wing defector. Giovanni Gentile was a left-wing defector. Giovanni Gentile was personally praised by Lenin. All right? These people were traitors. All right?
Was Mussolini really a leftist? Or was he just like...
Comes out of Marx.
Okay.
He was not just a leftist. He was part of the left flank of the Revolutionary Social Democrat youth movement. Mm-hmm. He made an accelerationist argument for entering into World War I to destroy the Italian state, and ended up during World War I flipping sides. That's what happened.
Okay. Wasn't clear if he was just like, you know, smashing lefty chicks or not.
No, he wasn't. No,
that's the word on
Obama.
Yeah. Pulled an Obama. Yeah.
Well, look, we've been talking for over 3 hours. It's getting late.
We have more super chats. This was a fire show.
We'll wait for super chats.
Yes. Waiting for super chats is good. Okay. We have a super sticker from MIDI Doctors. Try again. I don't know what that means. The game controller GIF. Let's see. We have Strom. Okay, but what is Barista Gate? I don't know what that means.
Barista Gate is this stupid debate that came out of a split between the Patriotic Socialists arguing off of some obscure stuff in Capital Volume 2 and in Theories of Surplus Value that ignores other stuff in the same books that argues that service workers are not proletariat. And then that also ignores the stuff in the manifesto that says any proletarianized class should be respected because they've thrown their lot into the proletariat. They argue that we should not be supporting barista unionization or any service sector unionization because they're not true proles, which is batshit. But whatever. That was a debate that raged on Twitter for 2 fucking weeks.
Wow.
People are just mad that like somebody's doing something way more important than they are. And it's like, and it's just like it's groups of people who they've been degrading and despising for so long, right? Like this whole like, because if you have to start a conversation with these blue-haired woke whatever the fuck, like I already know exactly. We already know exactly where you're coming from.
Service workers make it obvious that the blue hairs are not just PMC, right? Yep. And also, I hate to tell these people, but I'm like, the blue collar workers that you talk about are such a small part of the, particularly if you remove state workers, because if you move anyone doing state contracts as not being productive, and according to traditional markets categories, when they're functioning for state contracts, they're not. And if you think that's a moral and political category, which it isn't, but they argue that it is, then you are limiting yourself to like 5% of the working class. So, you know,
and that's the vanguard, baby.
So I guess if that's what you want, but if
I have a very
serious
question for Varn and Marcus. Varn, I know you've lived in Mexico. Marcus, I know you've been in the desert doing soldier stuff. Last night I came home and I thought I saw a large grasshopper on the ground. Mm-hmm. And, usually when I see bugs here, they're bigger and colorful, and I went to look down and go, hey, it was a scorpion. And I screamed. Nope. Mm-hmm. And the scorpion screamed, and then he ran in front of my door.
The scorpion screamed.
And parked in front of my welcome mat. Okay. I was this close to giving the scorpion my keys and saying, you know, I just bought milk, so it's new. Don't worry about throwing it out. And I didn't have shoes on where I felt comfortable stepping on it. So I know you guys have seen scorpions in your time in foreign lands. What do you do when handling a scorpion?
I use a stick and just move it out of the way.
I
stick.
scream. I do what you do. I scream. But like I've never encountered scorpions in an area where I couldn't just like leave that area, right?
No, I had
Like
to
I
check my
walked into
boots
your
when I lived in-
territory, you know, like I'm going to take a shit somewhere else. Scorpion, this is all you. I'm like,
check your boots in the morning, or your shoes in the morning,
yeah.
Jason, because it really is a problem. Like they'll crawl up in your shoes when I lived in northern Mexico. So I was like, and throw them out.
Yeah, but what's horrible is that I saw the scorpion, and I screamed, and I thought the scorpion was punking me by running to the door, but we both kind of went and the scorpion was like running away from me.
Yeah, because you're a big, scary, giant human thing.
yeah.
Like,
Totally, dude. It took 15 minutes for me standing outside of my door at like 11 o'clock at night before I came in. And so I'm bringing this up because there's a guy that just moved in next door, and he has a mat in front of his door. So I grabbed his mat, threw it on top of mine. It was on the scorpion. I run in the house shaking. I get in the house. I forgot to put the mat back. So I can see the guy walk by, and he looks all pissed.
Would you steal my fucking mat? Why'd you steal my mat?
Yeah, man, fuck! I just moved in here. It's a fucking mat thief.
Oh wow!
So now I have to make peace
But
with.
I would say, yeah, like, and that's the thing. Like Varn is saying, like, if you are in an area with fucking scorpions, like these things can fuck you absolutely up bad. Like big, like the spiders you'll run out there. Like usually, like the spiders in the desert, they're like, you know, they just hunt shit. They don't like poison shit. Like if you get like those spiders, like a lot of times they just, you know, they're big and scary. Like a scorpion, nah, you know, like don't fuck with them. Like they, like a lot of them. Well, yeah, like it's
That's
not
definitely true for the Madre de Alacran. Do you have those? Do you have those in where you're at?
What did you say?
which one.
The Madre de Alacran are they're called camel spiders in English.
Yes, there's a big one in the corner. So I really, there's part of me that wants to like take the phone out so you guys can see, but then I don't want people to see my house. Not that anyone's gonna find it. I just don't want it. And so there is a big, huge spider. It's massive. This motherfucker is massive. And I've been watching it to make sure that he's not trying to sneak in. Because, again, if he gets in,
it's his part.
Here's the
Yeah,
keys.
they're not poisonous, though. The Madre de Alacrans are not poisonous.
He's scaring the shit out of me.
Oh, he'll definitely scare shit. Also, he can break skin. I mean, they have little...
Yeah.
They have... Those are the spiders with scorpion pincers. Like...
That's the motherfucker that's up there.
Yeah, that's the Madre de Alacran, the mother of scorpions.
So,
That's what it's called.
Oh, my God.
Which, did you know
And
that
the part about all this-
scorpion...
The fucked up
Scorpion
part about all this-
anti-venom... What's up?
I said the fucked up part about all this. I went out to eat last night, and I'm by myself, and there's like a white couple next to me, and we're talking, and they're like, "Oh, why did you move to Mexico?" And I was like, "Poverty." And she's like, "Really? Why?" I was like, "Poverty." And so we're having this conversation, and the husband is trying to convince his wife, like, "Hey, it's not scary down here." And the lady's like, "She isn't really scary." And I'm like telling her how wonderful it is, how I'm not afraid of shit, how it's just this beautiful fucking paradise where I could walk around at 1 a.m. and not worry about cartel crime. But I forgot to mention that there's scorpions that hang out in front of your door.
Yeah. I mean, the bugs are intense.
Bugs are intense.
Interesting thing, scorpion anti-venom is the second most expensive liquid on Earth.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Second most expensive liquid on Earth is scorpion anti-venom. You want to know what number 1 is?
What is that?
Thoroughbred horse semen.
Word.
Why do you know this?
Listen,
Right.
on the left, we need to critique, we need to analyze capitalism.
You're right.
And,
You're
you know,
right.
It drives us in certain ways, you know? I was like
all
looking
of
at the
my
cost of beer
analysis-
one day. I start
that makes sense.
analyzing liquids, and it's like you just come on to some of this information. But
Cost of
yeah.
beer.
It's funny because I'm like, in all my financial information, I have not learned that horse semen was the most expensive liquid commodity on the planet.
It's all right. We'll get it
So-
for next time.
Not jack of all. Apparently, you're not jack of all the
Revolution.
trades, Varn.
Horse semen.
All right.
On that note,
Okay,
gentlemen,
we have to go. And I'm really scared because I'm really afraid my neighbor's gonna look at me like I stole his fucking welcome mat, like I'm a weirdo.
Go give him back his mat.
He took it. He fucking. I saw him walk
Oh,
by.
then
Took
he
it. He had
knows.
like attitude when he was walking back.
He
Like
knows.
fucking guy, stealing fucking welcome mats. Fucking guy.
Rubbed a fucking scorpion all over it.
I river danced on that motherfucker.
Apparently, there's more super chats or something.
Oh no! Come on, let us go. Free us,
Okay.
chat.
Hey, thank you guys so much. We'll be back Tuesday with friend of show, former member of the Saturday crew, Paul Prescott, to talk about his latest piece in Jacobin. What is happening to the disappearing working class? Thank you guys very much. And Toussaint?
We are out.